This experience has haunted me for years, lingering in the back of my mind like a shadow that never quite fades. I've carried it with me for so long that I finally decided to share it, hoping it might help someone somehow or at least make sense of what happened. Back in the early 1980s, when I was about 8 or 9 years old, my family lived in a remote subdivision north of Divide, Colorado, a place so far from civilization it felt like the edge of the world. Our house sat on a gravel street that dead-ended in a cul-de-sac, perched on the side of a steep hill. There were only 3 houses at the end of the street, and ours was the middle one, flanked by neighbors on either side. The isolation meant I was often a latchkey kid, coming home from school to an empty house and spending a few hours alone until my parents returned. One afternoon, not long after the school bus dropped me off, I was settling into the quiet of the house when I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel outside. Peering out, I saw a car pull into our driveway, a vehicle I didn't recognize. My heart gave a little jolt. We didn't get random visitors out here. The subdivision was too far from anywhere for someone to just drop by. A man stepped out of the car, and I didn't know him. He was a stranger, and something about his presence set me on edge. Instinctively, I ducked behind the wood-burning stove in the corner of the living room, my small body pressed against the cool metal, trying to make myself invisible. The man didn't hesitate. He marched straight up to the front door and started knocking, hard, insistent knocks that echoed through the house. I stayed frozen, my breath shallow, hoping he'd go away. But he didn't. He leaned forward, peering through the window pane in the door, his eyes scanning the interior. Then, to my horror, he jiggled the doorknob, testing it, as if he might let himself in. The knocking continued, relentless, a steady rhythm that made my stomach churn. I couldn't stay hidden forever. The fear was suffocating, but so was the thought of doing nothing. I thought, maybe if he sees me, he'll realize someone's home and leave. Burglars don't want witnesses, right? So I stepped out from behind the stove, my legs trembling, and faced the door. Through the window pane, I saw him clearly now. A short white guy with round glasses, long brown hair that was thinning at the crown, and scruffy, longish beard. He looked at me, his expression unreadable, and asked through the glass, "Can you open the door?" His voice was calm, but it sent a shiver down my spine. I swallowed hard, trying to sound braver than I felt. "My dad's in the shower," I lied, hoping the mention of an adult would scare him off. But he didn't flinch, didn't react at all. Instead, he said, "I'm here to see your neighbors," and named the family that lived in the house to the left. His tone was flat, almost rehearsed, and it didn't sit right with me. I pointed him toward their house. "They live next door on the left," I said, my voice quivering. He nodded, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of frustration, maybe, that made my skin crawl. "Okay," he muttered, and turned as if to leave. I watched him walk back toward his car, my heart pounding, expecting him to get in and drive away. But he didn't. Instead of climbing into his car, he veered off and started walking around the side of our house. My stomach dropped. Our house was built into the hillside with a walkout basement that had a sliding glass door. If he was looking for a way in, that door was his best bet. Panic surged through me. This wasn't normal. No one just wanders around someone's house like that, especially not in a place as remote as this. I realized he might be trying to get into the basement, and even though the sliding door was locked, I wasn't taking any chances. My mind raced, picturing him breaking in, finding me alone. I grabbed the phone and prepared to bolt out the front door and into the woods if I had to. But then, to my relief, I saw him reappear on the other side of the house. He'd circled the entire building, his boots crunching on the gravel as he returned to his car. Without a glance back, he got in, started the engine, and tore out of the driveway, speeding up the gravel road in a cloud of dust. He never went to the neighbor's house, the ones he claimed he was there to see. Shaking, I picked up the phone and dialed my neighbor halfway up the street, a kind woman whose son was my age and who sometimes looked after me. I told her what happened, my voice trembling as I described the man and his car. She said she'd seen a vehicle speeding up the road just moments ago and told me to come to her house right away. I didn't hesitate. I ran out the door and cut through the woods, avoiding the road in case he doubled back. The trees felt safer, their shadows hiding me as I sprinted to her house, my heart still racing. When I told my parents later that evening, I don't think they fully grasped how serious it was. They brushed it off, saying he probably mistook our house for the neighbors since they weren't home. But I knew better. That man didn't make an honest mistake. Our street wasn't the kind of place you stumbled upon by accident. You had to know where you were going to end up in that subdivision, deep in the mountains. And the way he acted, his lack of reaction when I mentioned my dad, the way he circled the house like he knew its layout, the fact that he didn't break in but still tried the door, it all felt calculated. I'm convinced he knew I was alone, maybe even watched the house to figure out my routine. My parents asked the neighbors if they knew anyone matching the man's description. Short, white, round glasses, long brown hair, slightly balding, with a longish beard. But they had no idea who he could be. I never saw him again, and we moved out of state about a year later. Thankfully, I never heard of any kids going missing in the area, but I can't shake the feeling that he tried something similar with someone else. The remoteness of our home, the woods we kids often played in, if I'd opened that door, I'm certain I wouldn't be here today. They'd probably have thought I got lost or hurt in the forest, and no one would have suspected a thing. That thought still chills me to the bone. My parents got divorced when I was barely 2 years old, too young to remember the chaos of their separation. Growing up, my brother and I split our time between them, spending every other weekend with our dad, who had remarried a kind woman we called our stepmom. Those visits were something we always looked forward to, especially in the summer when we get to stay longer. That particular summer, when I had just turned 11, we planned a week-long camping trip that had my brother and me buzzing with excitement. We packed up our gear, loaded ourselves and our medium-sized dog Jackie into the car, and set off for a familiar campsite in California, a place we'd visited before. Dad warned us that the area was known for occasional sightings of bears, cougars, and other wildlife, which only added to the thrill of the adventure. For us kids, it was a chance to escape the heat of that swelteringly unbearable summer and dive into the cool waters of the lake. We arrived at the campsite late in the afternoon, the sun still blazing, but starting to dip toward the horizon. My brother and I were practically vibrating with energy, eager to explore and most of all to swim in the lake that shimmered just beyond the trees. We loved camping, the crackle of the fire, the smell of pine, the freedom of being out in the wild. And it had been ages since our last trip. As soon as we pulled into our spot, we jumped into action, unloading the car with a flurry of activity. We set up the tent, stashed the coolers and food supplies, and made sure everything was in order. With the campsite coming together, my stepmom and I decided to take a short walk down the small dirt road to the spigot to fill our water pouches, a routine task that felt like part of the camping ritual. As we reached the spigot, I glanced across the road and noticed another campsite occupied by 3 men. 2 of them were standing around, laughing loudly and swigging beers, their voices carrying over the quiet of the afternoon. The third man sat near their fire, a beer in his hand, his posture slouched but his gaze sharp. He was chubby, wearing a stained t-shirt and black cargo pants, his hair unkempt and his face shadowed with stubble. As I filled my water pouch, I felt his eyes on me. I looked up and our eyes locked. Something about the way he stared, unblinking, intense, made my skin prickle. Trying to be polite, I offered a small, hesitant smile before quickly looking back at my stepmom, who was focused on filling her pouch. The water gurgled into the container, a steady sound that grounded me for a moment. But when I glanced back a few seconds later, he was still staring. His expression hadn't changed, but now a wide, unsettling grin spread across his face, like he was amused by something I couldn't see. My stomach twisted. I tried to focus on the task, gripping the pouch tightly as the cold water splashed against my fingers. I couldn't shake the weight of his gaze. I stole another glance, hoping he'd looked away, but he hadn't. That grin was still there, wider now, almost mocking. A wave of unease washed over me, and I couldn't bring myself to look at him again. That man across from us won't stop staring at me. I whispered to my stepmom, my voice small but urgent. She glanced over, her eyes narrowing as she took in the scene. The man didn't flinch, his gaze still fixed on me. "Just don't look," she said, her tone calm but firm as she finished filling her pouch. "Come on, let's go back." We turned and walked up the dirt road toward our campsite, the crunch of gravel under our feet mixing with the distant laughter from the men's camp. I kept my eyes on the path, but my skin still crawled. like his stare was burning into my back. When we were far enough away, hidden by the trees and bushes, I risked one last glance over my shoulder. He was gone, at least I couldn't see him anymore. Relief flickered through me, but it didn't fully settle. That night, we pushed the encounter aside and focused on the joy of being together. We roasted hot dogs over the fire, the smoky aroma filling the air as the flames crackled. After dinner, we gathered around a propane lamp, its soft glow casting shadows on our faces as we played Uno, laughing and teasing each other over who was sneaking cards. It was the kind of perfect camping night that made you forget the world outside the firelight. Eventually, exhaustion set in, and we decided to call it a night. My brother and I shared a tent, while Dad and Stepmom had their own. Jackie, our loyal dog, curled up in our tent, his familiar warmth a comfort as we crawled into our sleeping bags. The forest was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves or distant hoot of an owl. I fell into a deep sleep almost instantly, the day's excitement pulling me under. But sometime in the night, I jolted awake, my heart racing before I even knew why. The sound had pulled me from sleep, something faint but unmistakable. I lay still, straining to listen. There it was again, the crunch of leaves and twigs snapping outside the tent. My first thought was wildlife. Dad had mentioned bears and cougars, hadn't he? My mind conjured images of a hulking shadow prowling just beyond the thin fabric of the tent. I glanced at my brother and Jackie, both still fast asleep, their steady breathing a contrast to my quickening pulse. The sounds continued, slow and deliberate, not like the erratic tread of an animal. These were heavy, measured steps, like someone wearing work boots, each one sending a jolt of fear through me. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, just the forest playing tricks, but the footsteps didn't stop. They circled the tent, moving from one side to the other, the crunching growing louder, then softer, then loud again. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears. I hugged my knees, pulling the sleeping bag tighter around me, trying to stay as still and quiet as possible. The steps paused right in front of the tent's entrance, and for what felt like an eternity, maybe a minute, maybe longer, there was nothing but silence. I held my breath, waiting, praying it was just my imagination. Then, to my absolute horror, I heard the slow, unmistakable sound of the tent zipper starting to open. The metallic rasp was like a scream in the quiet night. Panic surged through me, raw electric fear that made my body feel like it was buzzing. I scrambled to the far corner of the tent, near my brother, grabbing the flashlight I kept by my sleeping bag. My hands shook as I fumbled to turn it on, my eyes locked on the tent's entrance. I pointed the beam at the door, hoping the light would scare off whatever was out there, praying it was just an animal. The unzipping stopped for a moment, and I held my breath, clinging to a flicker of hope. But then it started again, slower, more deliberate. A hand reached through the opening, then an arm. My heart stopped as a head appeared, and I saw his face. That same damn guy from the spigot, the one with the dirty t-shirt and the creepy grin. He was halfway inside my tent now, staring at me with that same unsettling smile, his eyes gleaming in the flashlight's beam. Tears streamed down my face as terror paralyzed me. I was crying, unable to move, my mind screaming. What do I do? I couldn't think, couldn't breathe. Then a low growl snapped me out of my haze. Jackie was awake, his hackles raised, his eyes fixed on a man. My brother stirred, blinking in confusion, asking, "What's happening?" But Jackie was already in motion, his growl turning into a fierce barrage of barks. He lunged toward the entrance, not baring his teeth but making enough noise to wake the entire forest. The man froze, his grin faltering, and then he scrambled backward, pulling himself out of the tent as Jackie chased after him, barking furiously. The man's heavy footsteps retreated, fading into the night. Dad and Stepmom burst into our tent moments later, their faces pale with worry. I was still shaking, clutching the flashlight, tears streaming down my cheeks as I told them everything. The man at the spigot, his creepy stare, and now this. Dad grabbed a flashlight and ran after him, Jackie still barking in the distance. When Dad returned a few minutes later, Jackie trotting beside him, he said the man was gone. Apparently, Jackie had chased him to a fence, where he must have jumped over to escape. The next morning, we reported everything to the park ranger and the local police, recounting every detail of the terrifying night. I still shudder when I think about what might have happened if Jackie hadn't been in our tent. I don't know if that man just wanted to scare me, hurt me, or something worse, but I'm grateful I never found out. Now that I'm older, I still love camping, but I never go without protection. A knife, pepper spray, something to keep me safe. And I never, ever go without my dog. Jackie saved me that night, and I'll never forget the way his barks cut through the darkness, driving away the shadow that tried to creep into our tent. When I was a kid, I spent one crisp autumn afternoon helping a neighbor rake leaves on his property, a task that filled the air with the earthy scent of damp leaves and the satisfying crunch of them underfoot. He was a friendly guy, close with my family, always chatting with my parents whenever he got the chance. The day had been long but fun, with the two of us working side by side, piling leaves into towering heaps as the sunlight filtered through the trees. When we finished, he offered to walk me home, saying he wanted to swing by and say hi to my parents. It was a short walk just down the street, and the familiar path felt safe as we talked and laughed about nothing in particular, the kind of easy conversation that comes with knowing someone well. As we stepped into the house, the familiar creak of the front door greeted us. The living room was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of late afternoon light streaming through the windows. From upstairs, I could hear my mom's voice, muffled but distinct, carrying on what sounded like a phone conversation. Her words were indistinct, but the cadence of her speech, pauses, rises, and falls, made me assume she was chatting with someone, maybe a friend or relative. The sound of her pacing accompanied her voice, the faint creak of the floorboards marking her steps. I called out for my dad, my voice echoing slightly in the stillness of the house. "Dad." No answer came. The silence from the rest of the house felt odd, but I didn't think much of it at first. My neighbor, standing in the entryway, tilted his head, listening to the sounds from upstairs. "Well, sounds like your mama's on the phone," he said with a chuckle, his voice warm but casual. "I'll catch them another time." We exchanged quick goodbyes, and he stepped out, the door clicking shut behind him. I watched him walk down the path for a moment, his figure disappearing into the fading daylight before turning back to the house. The sound of my mom's voice still drifted down from upstairs, and I figured I'd go find her, maybe tell her about the day, or see if she needed anything. I climbed the stairs, the wood creaking under my sneakers, and called out again. "Mom." The house answered with silence. Her voice had stopped, and the pacing had ceased. I frowned, a flicker of confusion stirring in my chest. I checked her bedroom, expecting to find her sitting on the bed with the phone pressed to her ear, but the room was empty. The bed was neatly made, the curtains drawn to let in the soft light. I moved to the other rooms, my parents' office, the guest room, even the bathroom, calling her name softly, then louder. Nothing. The upstairs hallway was eerily still, the air heavy with a quiet that felt wrong, like the house was holding its breath. I searched the entire house, my footsteps quickening as I checked the kitchen, the living room, even the basement, half expecting to find her somewhere I'd overlooked. But the house was empty, every room silent and untouched. A chill crept up my spine, settling into my bones. I stood in the middle of the living room, my heart beating a little faster, trying to make sense of what was happening. My neighbor and I had both heard her voice, her footsteps, clear as day. How could she not be here? I grabbed the phone, my fingers trembling slightly as I dialed my dad's cell. My mom didn't have a phone of her own, so he was my only option. He picked up almost immediately, his voice cheerful and familiar. "Hey kiddo, what's up?" he said. "Where are you?" I asked, my voice tighter than I meant it to be. "Do you know where Mom went?" There was a brief pause, and then he said, "We're at the store. We've been running errands for a couple of hours." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. My skin prickled with goosebumps, a cold wave of dread washing over me. "A couple of hours," I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. My neighbor and I had both heard her voice clear as anything, just minutes ago. The footsteps, the pacing, the unmistakable sound of her talking. It wasn't possible. I stammered out what I'd heard, my words tumbling over each other as I explained the voice, the footsteps, the empty house. Dad's tone shifted, concern creeping in, but he didn't have an explanation either. He told me to stay put and said they'd be home soon. I couldn't stay inside. The house felt too big, too quiet, too wrong. I stepped outside, the cool air hitting my face as I sat on the porch, hugging my knees and staring at the street. My mind raced, replaying the sound of her voice, the creak of the floorboards. It wasn't just me. My neighbor had heard it too, had commented on it like it was the most normal thing in the world. But no one had been home. My parents had been gone for hours. Whatever we'd heard, whoever or whatever it wasn't my mom. The thought sent a shiver through me, and I stayed outside, watching the road until I saw my parents' car pull into the driveway, their familiar faces a small comfort against the unease that still lingered. I was 25, fresh out of college, and had been working my first real adult job for about a year. I'd been living alone in my apartment for roughly 6 months when I came home one evening to find my phone ringing. I hurried to answer it but missed the call. Checking the caller ID, I saw an unfamiliar number with an area code from my old college town about an hour away. I didn't think much of it and went about my evening routine. But within a couple of minutes, the same number called again. Curious, I picked up. "Hey girl, how are you? It's been forever," came a bright, overly enthusiastic voice on the other end. "Hi," I replied, caught off guard. "Who's this?" "Girl, it's Mandy. What you up to?" I racked my brain. I knew 4 Mandys in my life, but none of them lived in my college town, and none of them would call me girl like that. The voice didn't sound familiar, and something about the tone felt off. "Mandy who?" I asked, trying to piece it together. "Oh my gosh, we have so much to catch up on," she barreled on, ignoring my question. "So, you moved back to our hometown. That's awesome. Where are you working? Are you still dating that guy from high school? I totally thought you two were gonna end up together. How are your parents? Where do you live now? What are you doing tonight?" Her rapid-fire questions hit me like a tidal wave, and I froze. That's when it clicked. This had to be Mandy Jones from high school. We'd been friends back in elementary school when we took dance classes together, but we drifted apart years ago. Why would she be calling me out of the blue like this? The whole thing felt wrong, like a puzzle with missing pieces. Hey, yeah, I said cautiously, trying to keep up. "I'm working at a local business back in my hometown. What about you? What's going on?" "Oh, that's so great," she gushed. "I always knew you'd be somebody. So, where do you live now? Are you still with that cute guy from high school?" This was getting weirder by the second. I'd had one boyfriend in high school, but he went to a different school, and we'd only dated for a couple of months before breaking up. It was hardly some epic romance. Whoever this was, they were fishing for details, and their story wasn't adding up. "Okay, Mandy who exactly?" I pressed, my voice sharpening. "Girl, Mandy. Come on," she laughed, but it sounded forced. She kept going, bombarding me with personal questions, where I lived, what I was doing, who I was dating. I dodged her questions, growing more uneasy with each passing second. She was relentless, circling back to my address and that cute guy from high school again and again. Finally, I'd had enough. "Look, I don't know who you are, and I have no idea how you got this number," I said, my tone firm. "Girl, it's Mandy." "Mandy Roper," she insisted, her voice dripping with fake familiarity. "I know it's been a while, but you wrote this number in my yearbook. I found it and thought we should catch up." That's when every alarm bell in my head went off. Let me tell you a few things about Mandy Roper. First, this woman on the phone sounded nothing like her. Mandy Roper didn't have a chirpy Valley Girl vibe. She sounded more like someone who'd been chain-smoking since preschool. Second, yeah, we did play volleyball together, but only for 1 year in high school. If you asked this caller, I bet she'd say we played basketball because third, basketball was the reason Mandy Roper despised me. I was one of the few freshmen who made the varsity team, and within 2 weeks, I'd earned the wrath of one of the scariest girls on the squad. It's a long, ridiculous teenage drama that doesn't matter now. But trust me, Mandy Roper would sooner spit in my coffee than call me up for a friendly chat. And fourth, I'd only gotten this phone number when I moved into my apartment 6 months ago. There's no way I could have written it in her yearbook back in high school, and even if I had, I'd have faked my own death before giving my number to that lunatic. So I laid it all out. "You don't sound like Mandy Roper," I said, my voice cold. "I couldn't have given you this number in high school because I've only had it for 6 months. And Mandy Roper hates my guts. She wouldn't care what I'm doing now. Who is this? Seriously, who the hell are you?" The line went silent. Then, with a venomous edge, she hissed, "Screw you," and hung up. The calls didn't stop there. Over the next few days, I started getting hang-up calls at my office. Then, one evening, I found a single rose left on my doorstep. My boyfriend at the time swore he hadn't left it, and I believed him. I was completely naive about stalking or harassment back then, so I didn't know what to make of it. The hang-ups eventually tapered off, but I was rattled. I called a friend who still lived in my college town and asked her husband, a cop, for advice. He took the number and traced it for me. When he called the number, he spoke to an elderly woman who lived alone. She sounded completely confused by the whole thing and insisted no one else could have used her phone. Whoever this fake Mandy was, they must have been close to that woman, because after the cops' call, the harassment stopped. Years later, I pieced together why someone might have chosen to impersonate Mandy Roper. We'd only played volleyball together for 1 season, and in the team photo in the yearbook, we happened to be seated next to each other. In that picture, we're both smiling, having learned to tolerate each other by then. Someone must have gotten their hands on an 8-year-old yearbook from my high school, looked me up, saw Mandy Roper sitting next to me in that photo, and decided to use her name to mess with me. They called and harassed me for weeks, and even now, 14 years later, I still don't know the who, what, when, where, why, or how. I initially suspected it might have been my college ex's ex-girlfriend, Becky, who he dated before me. She still lived in the college town and had never liked me. But I couldn't connect her to the elderly woman's phone number, and my ex swore Becky was too timid to pull something like this. She was more the type to cry, write angsty poetry, and listen to Jewel on repeat. Eventually, I realized it probably had something to do with my boyfriend at the time, Joe, who I'm pretty sure was juggling multiple women, most of whom were jealous and unhinged. Whoever the fake Mandy Roper was, she vanished into thin air. As for the real Mandy Roper, I still see her sometimes in the grocery store. We avoid each other like the plague, and she still looks like she'd love nothing more than to shove me into a locker. One of the creepiest experiences I've ever had happened back in August 2013, during a planned 7 to 8 day hike through the rugged wilderness of Glenshee, Scotland. My friend and I were seasoned hikers, confident in our ability to pitch a tent, keep ourselves warm, and recognize when something felt off. By the 3rd day of our grueling trek, we'd reached the summit of Glenshee, a small remote hamlet perched on the side of a steep, challenging mountain. The climb had been tough, but we made it to the top just before early evening. The next village was over 10 miles away in the direction we were headed, far too distant to reach before nightfall. Fortunately, or so we thought at the time, there was a bothy, a small mountain cabin, tucked back a bit from the peak on an open, sparse, grassy hill. The area around the bothy felt oddly quiet. I noticed there were no sheep grazing nearby, which struck me as unusual for such a place, but the landscape was barren enough that I brushed it off. The bothy itself looked inviting from the outside, sturdy, weatherproof, and promising a dry place to rest. That was all we needed after a long day of hiking. Inside, the walls told a different story. Every inch of wood, every surface, was covered with carvings, names, sayings, random scribbles left by previous visitors marking their presence in this remote outpost. My friend seemed less enthusiastic about staying than I was. She hesitated, eyeing the graffiti-covered walls with unease, but the weather was turning. A sudden hailstorm rattled the cabin, and we both agreed that spending the night in a dry shelter beat braving the elements. One night wouldn't hurt, right? We set up our camping rolls and sleeping bags against the far wall, deliberately choosing a spot away from the large door and the small, front-facing windows that looked out onto the surrounding mountains. Despite the shelter, we were both a little on edge. Maybe it was the isolation, or maybe it was the eerie atmosphere of the bothy, with its countless carved names staring down at us. To ease my nerves, I dragged a heavy wooden bench from one of the walls and wedged it under the door handle. I told myself it was to keep the door from blowing open in the wind, but deep down, I think I was worried about something else entirely. Looking back, that move probably saved us from whatever was to come during the gale-like night ahead. We tried to settle in, but sleep didn't come easily. Around 2 a.m., I jolted awake to the sound of a woman's voice. At first, I thought it might be my friend, but the pitch was too high, and it was coming from outside far from where we lay. My friend was still sleeping soundly next to me, her breathing steady. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was just the wind or my imagination, and attempted to drift back to sleep. Then I heard it, a distinct tap on one of the front windows. My heart skipped a beat. We were behind a wall, out of sight from the windows, and I didn't dare creep forward to look. There were no trees nearby, no branches to blame for the noise. The wind was strong, sure, but strong enough to fling something against the glass? I wasn't convinced. Just as I tried to rationalize it, I heard the woman's voice again, louder this time, followed by a second much lower voice that seemed to echo or repeat the same sound. I couldn't make out the words, but the voices were unmistakable. My friend stirred beside me, and in a whisper she asked, "Can you hear the voices?" I nodded, my pulse racing, and we instinctively crouched closer to the wall, seeking some sense of safety in its shadow. The creepiest part came next. The tapping started again, slow and deliberate, like someone was testing the windows. Then the door handle began to shake, rattling violently as if someone or something was trying to get in. The tapping and shaking happened simultaneously, which meant there had to be at least 2 people out there, in the dead of night, in the middle of nowhere, trying to enter the bothy. My friend started to crawl toward the door, maybe to check or reinforce it, but I grabbed her arm and pulled her back. Just as I did, every sound stopped, the tapping, the shaking, even the voices. All we could hear was the howling wind and the pelting rain. We held our breath, waiting. Then a tapping returned, slower this time, followed by a chilling new sound, scratching, like nails dragging across the glass. It was rhythmic, deliberate. Tap, scratch, tap, scratch. My stomach churned. If it was people out there, why didn't they call out? Why didn't they ask to come in? Surely anyone seeking shelter would say something. The tapping and scratching continued, relentless, pausing only when we shifted or made the slightest noise, then resuming once we retreated to our corner. I clutched my multi-tool, its cold metal reassuring in my hand, as we sat there in the dark, dreading whatever was outside. The noises went on for what felt like an eternity, though it was probably only a few minutes. Eventually, exhausted and overwhelmed, we must have fallen back asleep, still huddled against the wall, my hand gripping the tool like a lifeline. When we woke around 5:45 or 6 a.m., the storm had passed. The air was still, and faint sunlight filtered through the windows, casting a soft glow over the bothy. The mountain was eerily quiet. I stepped outside first, my breath catching as I scanned the ground for any sign of what we'd heard. I searched for footprints, boot prints, tire tracks, anything to prove that people had been there. I circled the cabin, even climbed a short way up the surrounding slopes, but the only tracks I found were my own, fresh in the muddy ground from the night's rain. There was nothing else, no evidence of anyone or anything having been there. As I returned to the bothy, my friend was already packed, her face pale but determined. She was ready to leave, and so was I. Before we headed out, she pointed to something I hadn't noticed, a single large handprint on one of the front windows. It was greasy, unnaturally large, and stood out starkly against the glass. There was only one print, no smudges or other marks, just that solitary, unsettling imprint. We didn't say much. We grabbed our gear and left, moving quickly down a muddy trail toward the next village. For the next 5 miles, we couldn't stop looking over our shoulders, half expecting something to follow us. That night still haunts us. It was one of the most unnerving experiences of my life, and my friend and I rarely bring it up. When we do, it's in hushed tones, as if talking about it might summon whatever was out there, tapping and scratching in the dark. Back in 2011, I found myself in a precarious situation in Ethiopia, a place far from the tourist trails, in an area my friends grimly nicknamed the place where no one can hear you scream. It was called Ario Kanto, a name that still sends shivers down my spine. I had been staying in Addis Ababa for about a month, renting a cozy little bed and breakfast that had become my temporary home. Across the street was a bustling restaurant where I often grabbed meals, and over time, I struck up a friendship with one of the waiters there. He was a familiar face, always cheerful, always ready with a smile when I walked in. We'd chat about the city, the food, the weather, small talk that made me feel a bit less like a stranger in a foreign land. Everyone on the street seemed to know him, and by extension, they knew me too. I felt a sense of safety in that familiarity, like I'd carved out a small corner of belonging in this vibrant, chaotic city. One evening, the waiter invited me to visit his family. It seemed like a genuine gesture, an opportunity to experience authentic Ethiopian hospitality. I figured it was safe enough, I knew where he worked, and we built what I thought was a solid rapport over the past month. In all our interactions, he'd never given me any reason to suspect ulterior motives. No red flags, no creepy vibes, no unwanted advances. Just a friendly guy who seemed proud to share a piece of his life with me. So I agreed, excited at the prospect of meeting his family and seeing a side of Ethiopia most tourists never get to experience. We set off together, and as we approached his family's house in Ario Kanto, a knot of unease began to form in my stomach. The area was far from the lively streets of Addis I'd grown accustomed to. It was darker, quieter, with an eerie stillness that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. When we arrived at the house, I immediately sensed something was off. Two men were standing outside, their silhouettes barely illuminated by the dim streetlight. My friend didn't introduce me to them, which struck me as odd given how warm and open he'd always been. Instead, he launched into a rapid conversation with them in Amharic, a language I barely understood. I caught fragments of their words, snippets like foreigner, white, and woman, and my unease deepened into nervousness. The air felt thick with tension, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being scrutinized. Trying to regain some control over the situation, I turned to my friend and asked, "Should we go inside to meet your family?" My voice was calm, but inside, my heart was starting to race. He didn't respond. He didn't even look at me. He just kept talking to the two men, his tone growing more animated, almost argumentative. I stood there, feeling increasingly like an outsider in a conversation I wasn't meant to understand. Then, without warning, one of the men grabbed my hand, his grip firm and unyielding, and started pulling me toward the house. Panic surged through me. I yanked my hand back, resisting with all my strength, and looked to my friend for help. "Please stop him," I said, my voice trembling as I addressed the man tugging at me. "Let go of me." For a moment, I thought my friend was stepping in to defend me. He moved closer, his face serious, and I felt a flicker of hope. But that hope shattered as the situation escalated into something far worse. The three men began arguing loudly, their voices rising in a heated exchange. I was standing in the middle of them, my heart pounding, as their words swirled around me. It wasn't until I started picking up numbers, prices, I realized with growing horror that the truth hit me like a punch to the gut. My friend, the waiter I trusted, wasn't defending me. He was negotiating. They were discussing how much I was worth, who would take me where, and for what price. Terror seized me. My mind raced, and my instincts screamed at me to get out. I didn't think twice. I turned and ran. My feet pounded against the uneven ground, my breath coming in sharp gasps as I sprinted down the dark street. I didn't dare look back, but after a few moments, I realized I didn't hear footsteps chasing me. In hindsight, I don't think they pursued me for more than a few meters, if at all. Maybe they didn't expect me to bolt, or maybe they figured I wasn't worth the effort. Either way, I didn't stop until I was far enough away to feel a fleeting sense of safety. I came to a halt in the middle of the street, my chest heaving, my mind reeling. A new problem hit me like a wave. I was a 21-year-old white girl, alone in Ario Kanto after dark, in a place where no tourist should ever be. The streets were unfamiliar, the shadows seemed to close in, and every sound made me jump. I knew I had to get out of there, but I had no idea how. Miraculously, I spotted a taxi approaching, its headlights cutting through the darkness. I waved it down frantically, my hand shaking. I knew the risks. Everyone warns you never to take a street taxi alone at night in a place like Ario Kanto. But I had no other option. I climbed in, my voice trembling as I gave the driver directions to the main road. To my immense relief, he was a man of his word. He drove me straight to the main road. No detours, no funny business. I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me as I stepped out onto the familiar, brighter streets of Addis. I made it back to my B&B, shaken but unharmed. I was lucky beyond lucky that I hadn't been sold into some nightmare on the Ethiopian black market that night. I never saw the waiter again after that. I went to the restaurant the next day and told the manager what had happened. They were horrified, assuring me they'd deal with him if he ever showed his face again. They promised to kick his ass, and I believed them. The street had a way of handling its own justice. A few years later, I returned to Addis for another visit. The owner of the B&B, who'd become a friend over time, pulled me aside one day. He told me the waiter had come back to the area. Not only that, but he'd been asking about me. He'd even left a gift for me at the B&B, a traditional Ethiopian painting on goat skin depicting a woman. It was a haunting image, delicate and intricate, but it carried a weight I couldn't ignore. I took it home with me. It now hangs on my wall, a constant reminder of that night and a warning to always be careful, no matter how safe you think you are. I work for a utility company in Massachusetts, a job that takes me into people's homes almost every day. I'm 22, and my partner in the field is a 23-year-old guy who's been my work buddy for a while now. We're a solid team, always watching each other's backs, and he's as reliable as they come. One day, we got scheduled for a shut-off at a house in a wealthy town due to non-payment. It seemed odd. Houses in this area are usually mansions, owned by people who don't miss bills. We figured it was a mistake, probably some clerical error or an oversight by a busy homeowner. So we hopped in our work van, ready to have a quick chat with the resident, clear things up, and move on with our day. The drive took about 20 minutes, winding through tree-lined streets with sprawling estates and perfectly manicured lawns. When we pulled up to the address, we both did a double take. This wasn't a mansion, it was barely a house. It looked more like a large shed, dwarfed by the neighboring properties. The place was run down, with peeling paint and a yard that hadn't seen a mower in years. What really caught our attention was the front door, almost completely blocked by a massive pile of dead tree branches, like someone had just dumped them there and walked away. It felt strange, but we shrugged it off. People live in all kinds of places, right? We parked the van, grabbed our paperwork, and headed toward the house. I climbed over the branches, careful not to trip, and knocked on the door. The wood felt flimsy under my knuckles, like it might give way if I hit it too hard. We waited. 5 minutes passed, and there was no answer, no footsteps, no voices, nothing. I glanced at my partner, who raised an eyebrow, but didn't say anything. I was about to suggest we leave and mark it as a no-show when the door creaked open. An older man stood there, his face weathered and his eyes sharp, like he was sizing us up. He didn't say much, just nodded as we explained the situation. The utility bill hadn't been paid, and we were here to shut off the service unless he could settle it or provide proof of payment. He didn't argue or seem surprised. Instead, he gestured toward the side of the house and said, "You'll find what you're looking for down there," pointing us to the basement door. His tone was calm but cryptic, and it sent a small chill down my spine. I brushed it off as nerves. Sometimes people get weird about shutoffs. My partner and I exchanged a quick look, and I volunteered to go down to the basement to handle the shutoff while he stayed upstairs with a man. It's standard procedure for one of us to stay with a homeowner while the other does the technical work, just to keep things smooth. The basement door was around the side of the house, half hidden by more overgrown weeds. I grabbed my flashlight and toolbox, took a deep breath, and headed down the narrow, creaky stairs. The basement was tiny, barely bigger than a closet, and almost pitch black. The air was damp and heavy, with a musty smell that made my nose wrinkle. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing cracked concrete walls and a tangle of old pipes. I found the utility panel quickly enough and got to work, but as I was fiddling with the shutoff valve, I froze. I could have sworn I heard whispering, low, indistinct voices, like a conversation just out of earshot. My heart skipped a beat. I swung my flashlight around, scanning every corner of the cramped space, but there was nothing. No one. just shadows and dust. I held my breath, listening harder, and there it was again, a faint murmur, like people talking in hushed tones. My skin prickled, and I felt a wave of unease, like I wasn't alone down there. I told myself it was probably pipes creaking or the wind outside, but it didn't feel right. I hurried through the shutoff, my hands moving faster than usual, and practically bolted back up the stairs. When I got back to the main level, my partner was in what passed for a kitchen, a cramped room with a mini fridge, a toaster oven, and a gaping hole in the floor that looked like it hadn't been fixed in years. He was standing there, looking a little uneasy himself. I asked him where the old man had gone, and he shrugged, saying, "I think he just went to the bathroom." His voice wasn't as confident as usual, and I could tell he was on edge too. We waited in that tiny, claustrophobic kitchen for what felt like forever, probably 15 minutes, shifting our weight from foot to foot, the silence between us growing heavier. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I walked over to the bathroom door, a flimsy piece of wood at the end of a short hallway, and knocked. "Sir," I called out. No answer. I raised my voice, trying to keep it professional. "Sir, we finished the shut-off and just need you to sign the form before we leave." Still nothing. I glanced at my partner, who nodded for me to check the door. My stomach twisted as I knocked again, louder this time. "Sir, can you hear me? We're done and just need your signature." Silence. I hesitated, then tried the doorknob. It turned easily. The door wasn't locked. I cracked it open, my voice shaking slightly. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't think you could hear me from the hallway. We finished the job, and we just need you to sign the form before we go." The door swung open to reveal a small, dimly lit bathroom. There was a sink, a toilet, a single bare light bulb dangling from the ceiling, and no windows. It was empty. Completely empty. I turned to my partner, my pulse racing. "Are you sure he went in there?" I asked, my voice sharper than I meant it to be. He looked as confused as I felt. "Yeah, I saw him go in and close the door behind him. He hasn't come out." His eyes darted to the bathroom, then back to me. We both knew something was wrong. The house was tiny. There was no way he could have slipped past my partner in that cramped kitchen without being noticed. The front door was still blocked by those branches, and there were no other exits we could see. We didn't say it out loud, but we were both thinking the same thing. Where the hell did he go? We didn't stick around to find out. I grabbed my toolbox, and we hightailed it out of there, pushing through the branches to get back to the van. I slammed the front door shut behind us, my hands shaking as I climbed into the driver's seat. My partner was quiet, his face pale, and I knew he was just as freaked out as I was. We didn't talk much on the drive back. I kept replaying the whispering in the basement, the empty bathroom, the way the old man had just vanished. I wish I had more evidence to make sense of it, but I'm in the habit of leaving my phone in the van's glove box during shifts, and my partner didn't have his either. All I've got is a photo of the front of that shed-like house, snapped from the van before we left. It's just a grainy image of a rundown building, but every time I look at it, I get the same uneasy feeling I had standing in that basement, hearing voices that shouldn't have been there. 30 years ago, when my oldest son was born, my husband and I were living in an apartment that seemed to attract trouble like a magnet. It wasn't just a quirky old building with creaky floors or bad plumbing. It was something else, something that made my skin crawl and left me questioning what was real. Strange things happened constantly, a steady drip of unsettling moments that piled up until we couldn't stay there anymore. Looking back, I can still feel the weight of that place, the way it seemed to watch us, waiting for us to notice it. One of the earliest incidents happened when I was pregnant, just days away from giving birth. My husband was working the third shift, so I was alone in our apartment, lying in bed with a book propped on my swollen belly. I wasn't sleepy. My mind was too restless for that, so I know I wasn't dreaming or drifting off. As I turned a page, I felt something unmistakable, the sensation of fingers walking across my belly, light and deliberate, like the old Yellow Pages commercial where fingers walked through the phone book. It was so clear, so real, that I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I dropped the book and stared at my belly, half expecting to see something, but there was nothing, just the soft glow of the bedside lamp and the quiet hum of the apartment. My heart pounded as I ran my hands over my stomach, trying to convince myself it was just a muscle twitch or my imagination. But I knew better. It felt like someone had touched me, and it freaked me out so badly I didn't sleep that night. After my son was born, the weirdness didn't stop. It got worse. When he was about a month old, I laid him down on a blanket in the living room for some tummy time, a routine every new mom knows by heart. I was in the kitchen just a few steps away, washing dishes in the sink. I was a typical nervous first-time mom, checking on him every 2 minutes, peeking around the corner to make sure he was okay. The first couple of times, he was there, cooing softly, kicking his little legs. But on the third check, my heart stopped. He was gone. The blanket was empty, the living room silent. I dropped the dish I was holding, the soapy water splashing onto the floor, and rushed over, my mind racing. The front door was still locked, the chain in place, and I hadn't heard a sound. No footsteps, no cries, nothing. My baby was too young to crawl or roll over, so where the hell was he? I tore through the apartment, my panic rising with every second. I was about to grab the phone to call the police when I heard a soft coo, so faint I thought I'd imagined it. I froze, straining to hear it again, my pulse hammering in my ears. "Baby, where are you?" I whispered, my voice shaking. Another soft coo answered me. I dropped to my knees, crawling across the floor, looking under furniture, desperate for any sign of him. That's when I saw him, under the end of the dining table, tucked behind a wooden board that ran around a base about a foot high. It enclosed the entire table like a skirt, leaving no easy way for him to get under there. He was lying there, calm and content, as if someone had gently placed him in that impossible spot. My hands trembled as I scooped him up, holding him close, my mind reeling. There was no way he could have moved there on his own. He wasn't even turning over yet. I sat there on the floor, clutching my baby, trying to make sense of what had just happened, but no explanation fit. As my son grew, the apartment seemed to grow bolder. He had a favorite toy, a colorful rattle he loved to wave around. It started disappearing, not just once but repeatedly, always turning up in the same bizarre place, the top shelf at the back of a storage closet we rarely used. The closet was in a corner of the apartment, stuffed with boxes and old coats, and the shelf was so high I needed a stepladder to reach it. The first time I found the rattle there, I wasn't even looking for it. I was rummaging for something else and spotted it tucked behind a dusty box. I thought it was odd but brushed it off as one of those random things kids' toys do. But then it happened again, and again every few days like clockwork. I'd search the apartment, only to find it in that same unreachable spot. It wasn't just the placement, it was the consistency of it, the way it felt deliberate, like someone was playing a game with us. When my son was about 3, he started talking about things that made my blood run cold. He'd sit in the living room, pointing at the TV, and talk about Malcolm and Graham, 2 kids he said lived on the TV, not in it, but on it like it was a window to somewhere else. He'd say they used to live in our apartment a long time ago, but got sick. His stories were so detailed, filled with little fragments that didn't sound like a toddler's imagination. Things like what they wore, how they played, and how sad they were when they got sick. I tried to chalk it up to a kid's vivid imagination, but it was creepy as hell. Sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I'd catch a flash of a striped shirt or the fleeting shape of a small boy darting through the room. It happened so often I stopped trusting my own eyes, telling myself it was just exhaustion or the stress of new motherhood. The apartment wasn't just eerie, it was toxic for us. My husband and I fought constantly, vicious arguments that came out of nowhere and left us drained. We were like rabid cats in a sack, clawing at each other over the smallest things. It wasn't us, not really, but the apartment seemed to amplify every tension, every fear. One day, when my son was still 3, I picked my husband up from work, and we drove back to the apartment. As we pulled up, my son lost it. He started screaming, refusing to go inside, his little body shaking with hysteria. It was so unlike him. He was usually such a calm kid that I knew something was wrong. His cries echoed in the car, raw and desperate, and I couldn't calm him down. I turned to my husband, my own panic rising, and said, "We're not going in there." I drove straight to my mom's house, my son still trembling in his car seat. That night, my husband and I had a long talk. He admitted he'd been seeing things too, flashes of movement, shadows that didn't belong. We were both scared all the time, living in a constant state of dread we hadn't dared name. It was like the apartment was feeding on us, wearing us down. We decided right then to move, to get out as fast as we could. But the moment we made that choice, things got worse, way worse. It was like the apartment knew we were leaving and wasn't happy about it. Physical things started happening. My hair would get yanked hard when I was alone in a room, the pain sharp enough to make me yell. The feeling of being watched was constant, a heavy, oppressive presence that followed me from room to room. It was awful, like living under a microscope with something malevolent staring down at you. I started packing in secret while my husband slept, shoving clothes and essentials into boxes during the day. We stayed at my mom's house at night, only returning to the apartment to grab more of our things. The whole process was a blur of fear and urgency, like we were racing against something we couldn't see. Eventually, we found a new place and moved out for good. The relief was overwhelming, like a weight lifting off my chest. That apartment, with its creeping shadows and impossible events, stayed with me though. Even now, 30 years later, I wonder if I'm a magnet for this kind of thing, or if it's just everywhere, waiting to be noticed. That place changed me, made me question what's possible, and left me with a lingering unease I'll never fully shake. I live about 20 miles outside the city where I work, in a quiet rural area surrounded by fields and woods. My house is a short walk from a highway, and at the corner, there's a 24/7 gas station that's become a familiar stop for late-night snacks or a quick fill-up. Last Saturday night, just before midnight, I decided to swing by to grab a bag of Cajun peanuts, my go-to when I'm craving something spicy. The gas station is usually dead at that hour, with just the cashier on duty and maybe one or two customers passing through. When I pulled into the lot, I noticed a single car parked off to the side, which didn't seem unusual. It's a small place, and sometimes people leave their cars there while they run in or take a break from the road. But as I stepped out of my truck, a wave of dread washed over me, heavy and unexplainable, like a warning I couldn't quite place. My gut was telling me something was wrong, but I brushed it off, chalking it up to the late hour and eerie stillness of the night. I pushed open the glass door, the chime ringing sharply above me, and stepped into the fluorescent-lit store. The place was empty, no one behind the counter, no customers browsing the aisles. The silence felt wrong, like the air was holding its breath. I scanned the room, expecting to see the cashier restocking shelves or maybe stepping out from the back, but there was nothing. Just rows of chips and candy bars, untouched, and the faint hum of the coolers in the background. I grabbed my bag of Cajun peanuts from the shelf, my footsteps echoing louder than they should have in the small space. I waited at the counter, clutching the bag, my unease growing with every passing second. Surely the cashier had heard the door chime when I came in. Maybe they were in the bathroom or grabbing something from the stockroom. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, but the feeling in my chest was tightening, like a coil ready to snap. After what felt like forever, but was probably only a minute, I called out, my voice sounding too loud in the empty store. "Is anyone there?" No response. The silence was deafening, pressing in on me. I waited another minute, my eyes darting to the corners of the store, half expecting someone to pop out. The dread was overwhelming now, a prickling sensation crawling up my spine. I set the peanuts down on the counter, my hands unsteady, and decided I wasn't sticking around. I walked out, the door chime ringing again as I stepped back into the cool night air. Before getting into my truck, I glanced at the car parked on the side, peering through its windows to see if anything looked off. It was empty, nothing unusual, just a beat-up sedan with a couple of fast food cups on the dash. I even circled to the back of the store, my flashlight beam cutting through the shadows, but there was no one there either, just a dumpster and some scattered trash. My discomfort was through the roof, so I got in my truck and called the police, my voice shaking as I explained that something felt wrong at the gas station. The cops showed up about 10 or 15 minutes later, their flashing lights painting the lot in red and blue. I stayed in my truck, watching as they went inside, their radios crackling. When they came out, their faces were grim. They found the cashier in the men's bathroom, beaten to death. The words hit me like a punch, and my stomach churned as I realized how close I'd been to whatever had happened. The officers asked me to walk them through what I'd seen. I walked in, found the store empty, called out, waited, and left when no one answered. They took my statement, their questions sharp but professional, and told me I could go home. But that wasn't even the worst part. When I got back to my house, my heart nearly stopped. My dog, who's always inside, was out in the front yard, pissing on the grass and staring at me with this intense, unblinking look. My front door was cracked open, just a sliver, but enough to make my blood run cold. I grabbed my dog, holding him close as his fur pressed against my shaking hands, and drove straight back to the gas station to tell the police. They sent an officer to check my house, and when we got there, nothing was stolen or out of place. No broken windows, no rifle drawers. But there were clear signs of forced entry, scratches around the lock and a slight dent in the door frame, like someone had pried it open. The officers searched every room, every closet, but found nothing. I stood in my living room, clutching my dog, trying to process it all. My wife, thank God, was out with friends watching Beauty and the Beast again, so she was safe. But I was rattled, my mind racing with what could have happened. About 5 hours ago, I got a call from my brother, who works for the county sheriff's office. He told me they'd pulled the camera footage from the gas station. What they saw made my skin crawl. About 10 minutes before I walked into the store, someone came in, attacked the cashier, and dragged him into the bathroom. The footage showed me entering, looking around, calling out, and leaving, checking the parked car before getting into my truck to call the police. While I was in my truck, the alleged murderer walked out of the bathroom and slipped out the back door, disappearing from the camera's view. He took off in the general direction of my house. My house. The timing lined up perfectly with the cracked door and my dog being outside. I'm convinced I narrowly missed crossing paths with a killer at that gas station, and then he broke into my home. This week, I had a new security system installed, complete with cameras and motion sensors, and replaced the front door with a sturdier one. But I can't shake the feeling that whoever did this is still out there, somewhere in the shadows. Every creak in the house, every rustle outside, puts me on edge. I keep replaying that night, the empty store, the dread, the open door, and I wonder how close I came to something much worse. I'm grateful my wife wasn't home, but I can't stop thinking about what might have happened if she had been, or if I'd stayed in that store just a few minutes longer. The idea of a romantic camping trip in the middle of nowhere sounded perfect when Sarah first suggested it. "It'll be just you and me under the stars," she said, her voice brimming with excitement. But now, as I sit trembling in our tent, surrounded by the eerie silence of the forest, I can't shake the feeling that we're not alone. The memory of her words feels like a cruel irony, and I regret ever agreeing to this. It all began yesterday afternoon. Sarah and I had been planning this getaway for weeks, desperate to escape the relentless grind of city life. We've been working overtime, our days reduced to fleeting kisses goodbye in the morning and exhausted, "How was your day?" exchanges at night. This trip was meant to be our chance to reconnect, to rediscover the spark that had drawn us together years ago. The drive out of the city was long, but as the concrete jungle gave way to rolling hills and dense forests, Sarah's enthusiasm became infectious. I found myself grinning as she rattled off her plans: hiking, stargazing, maybe even a midnight swim if we felt daring. Her eyes had that mischievous glint I'd fallen in love with, and at a red light, I leaned over to kiss her cheek, feeling a flicker of the old magic between us. As we ventured deeper into the wilderness, the paved roads turned to gravel, then to dirt. The GPS signal flickered in and out, but Sarah squeezed my hand and assured me she knew the way. "Trust me," she said, her voice confident. "I found this spot online. It's supposed to be beautiful and completely secluded." Those words, so full of promise then, now echo in my mind like a warning. We arrived at our destination just as the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold. The clearing was breathtaking, nestled among towering pines that seemed to scrape the heavens. A small stream gurgled nearby, its gentle babble blending with the chirping of birds settling in for the night. We set up our tent with the ease of a couple who'd done this a dozen times before, moving in sync like a well-oiled machine. As I hammered in the final stake, Sarah slipped her arms around my waist from behind, resting her chin on my shoulder. See, she murmured, her breath warm against my ear. Isn't this perfect? I turned to face her, taking in her flushed cheeks and windswept hair, illuminated by the golden light of dusk. In that moment, it did feel perfect. I kissed her deeply, the stress of the past few months melting away as we stood there, wrapped in each other. That evening, we built a crackling fire and cooked hot dogs, sharing a bottle of wine as we talked about everything and nothing. The stars emerged, twinkling brightly in the clear night sky. We spread a blanket on the ground, lying side by side, pointing out constellations and inventing our own. Sarah's laughter rang through the clearing, a sound so pure and joyful, I wanted to bottle it, to keep it with me forever. For a while, everything felt right, like we'd rediscovered the rhythm of us. But as we crawled into our tent for the night, a flicker of unease crept in. As I zipped up the tent flap, I caught a glimpse of movement in the tree line, a shadow darker than the surrounding night, darting between the trunks. I blinked, and it was gone. "Yo, did you see that?" I asked Sarah, my voice low. She was already nestled in her sleeping bag, eyes heavy with sleep and wine. "See what, bae?" she mumbled. I shook my head, dismissing it as my imagination, likely fueled by too many ghost stories and the caffeine from the drive. "Nothing," I said, sliding into my own sleeping bag. "Good night, love." Sarah's breathing evened out almost instantly, but sleep didn't come so easily for me. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig set my nerves on edge. I told myself it was just the forest's natural symphony, but the feeling of being watched gnawed at me. Around midnight, I heard it, footsteps slow and deliberate, circling our tent. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but as I became fully awake, the sound was unmistakable. Someone or something was out there, mere feet from where we lay. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure it would wake Sarah. I lay frozen, barely breathing, straining to track the movement. The footsteps completed one circuit around the tent, then another. On the third pass, they stopped right beside my head. I could hear breathing now, ragged, heavy, and human. A shadow fell across the tent wall, backlit by the moon. It looked like a hand reaching for the zipper. I must have let out a whimper or a gasp because Sarah stirred. "What's wrong?" she murmured, her voice thick with sleep. The shadow vanished, and the footsteps retreated quickly into the woods. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night, clutching Sarah close, jumping at every sound. She tried to soothe me, suggesting it was just an animal or the wind playing tricks, but I knew what I'd heard, what I'd seen. When dawn finally broke, painting the sky in pale pinks and golds, I unzipped the tent with trembling hands. Sarah followed, her face etched with concern. "See," she said, gesturing to the quiet clearing. "Everything's fine. It was probably just a deer or something, but everything wasn't fine." In the soft dirt around our tent were footprints, human footprints, far too large to belong to either of us. Sarah's face drained of color as she saw them. Maybe it was one of us," she suggested weakly. "Sleepwalking or something." I shook my head, pointing to the ground. "Look at the size of them, Sarah. They're much bigger than ours." We stood in stunned silence, the weight of what we were seeing sinking in. Someone had been here, watching us sleep, close enough to touch the tent. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "We need to leave," I said, already moving to dismantle the tent. "Now?" Sarah nodded, her earlier skepticism replaced by a fear that mirrored my own. We packed up in record time, constantly glancing over our shoulders, jumping at every rustle in the trees. As I was rolling up her sleeping bag, Sarah called out, her voice tight with panic. "Jake, come look at this." I jogged over to where she stood at the edge of the campsite. There, half hidden behind a bush, was a camera, a high-end, professional-looking one, its lens pointed directly at where our tent had been. "Oh God," Sarah whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "They've been watching us, recording us." The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't a random encounter. Someone had set this up, had chosen this spot, had lured us here. Had the online recommendation Sarah found been planted specifically for us? I grabbed the camera, not caring about fingerprints or evidence, driven by a desperate need to destroy whatever footage it held, to erase any trace of our vulnerable moments. We threw our gear into the car, the carefully packed trunk from yesterday, now a chaotic mess. I broke every speed limit on the way back to civilization, constantly checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a vehicle in pursuit. We drove straight to the police station, our story spilling out in a frantic, disjointed mess. The officers took our statement, but I could see the skepticism in their eyes. They probably thought we were just a couple spooked by normal forest sounds. The camera, they said, could have belonged to a hiker or nature photographer. But I know what I heard that night. I know what I saw. Weeks later, back in the city, I still can't shake the feeling that we're being watched. Our apartment doesn't feel safe anymore. I've caught glimpses of that same shadow on busy city streets, always vanishing when I turn for a closer look. Sarah thinks I'm paranoid, that I need to talk to someone about post-traumatic stress. Maybe she's right. But as I sit in our darkened living room, jumping at every creak and groan of the building settling, I can't help but wonder, what if they followed us home? The moment I heard the engine's low rumble, I knew we were in deep trouble. We were miles from the nearest town, hidden in the heart of a dense forest, where the only sound should have been the rustle of leaves and the calls of nocturnal creatures. Yet there it was, the unmistakable growl of a truck approaching. Trapped in the darkness of an abandoned cabin, we huddled together, praying that whoever was coming wouldn't find us. It was supposed to be a simple weekend hiking trip. Just me, my best friend Alex, and his girlfriend Mia. A chance to unwind, to escape the pressures of our final year of college. We'd done this trek before, or so we thought, and the promise of a familiar adventure had filled us with excitement. The day had started perfectly. Clear skies, a gentle breeze, and the forest alive with the chatter of birds and the whisper of leaves. We set out early, our backpacks stuffed with supplies, our spirits high as we joked and shared our dreams for the future. I'm telling you, Alex said, his arms slung around Mia's waist. After graduation, we should all take a year off and travel the world. When else are we going to get a chance like that? I rolled my eyes, but a smile tugged at my lips. Some of us have student loans to pay off, you know. Not everyone's got a trust fund. Mia laughed, giving my arm a playful punch. Oh, come on, live a little. We could work odd jobs along the way. It'll be an adventure. An adventure, if only we'd known what kind of adventure awaited us. Trouble started creeping in by early afternoon. We should have reached our campsite by then, a beautiful clearing by a small lake we'd visited last summer. But the landscape around us didn't look right. The trees were denser, the undergrowth thicker, and the lake was nowhere to be seen. Guys, Mia said, a note of worry creeping into her voice. I think we might be lost. Alex scoffed, pulling out his phone. Impossible. We've got GPS, remember? But his confident grin faded as he stared at the screen. No signal. A knot formed in my stomach as I checked my own phone, finding no bars either. We were completely off the grid. We pressed on, hoping to find a familiar landmark or reach higher ground for a signal. But as the hours dragged by and the sun dipped toward the horizon, it became clear we were well and truly lost. We need to find shelter, I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. It's going to be dark soon, and we're not equipped for night hiking. That's when we spotted it through a break in the trees, a structure, weathered in gray, half hidden by the forest. Hope surged through me. Maybe it was a ranger station or a caretaker's cabin, someone who could help us get our bearings. But as we drew closer, that hope withered. The cabin was old, its wooden walls sagging, windows boarded up, and vines snaking up its sides. It had clearly been abandoned for years. Should we go in? Mia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alex shook his head, his brow furrowed. I don't know. It doesn't look safe, but a chill wind picked up, rustling the leaves and sending a shiver down my spine. We didn't have much choice. The cabin, as dilapidated as it was our best bet for shelter. The door creaked ominously as Alex pushed it open, revealing a musty, dark interior. Cobwebs draped from the ceiling, and a thick layer of dust coated every surface. But it was dry, and it would shield us from the elements. Look, I said, pointing to an old fireplace in the corner. If we can get a fire going, we might actually be comfortable here. We set about making the cabin as livable as possible. Alex and I gathered wood from the surrounding area, snapping brittle branches and hauling them back, while Mia cleared a space on the floor for our sleeping bags. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, we had a small fire crackling in the fireplace, casting flickering shadows on the walls. For a moment, it felt almost cozy. But then Mia spotted something that shattered the illusion. "Guys, you need to see this," she called out, her voice tight with tension. In the corner of the room, partially hidden by a rotting dresser, was a duffel bag. Not some ancient, moth-eaten relic, but a modern, high-quality one, the kind you'd find in a sporting goods store. Alex approached it cautiously. Should we open it? Every instinct screamed at me to say no, to grab our things and take our chances in the forest, but curiosity got the better of us. The bag was heavy, its zipper stiff as Alex tugged it open. We leaned in to look, and what we saw made my blood run cold. Stacks of cash, bound with rubber bands, and beneath them, something that glinted in the firelight. Alex reached in and pulled it out, a gun. "Holy hell," he breathed, his voice barely audible. What have we stumbled into? We were so focused on the bag's contents that we almost missed the sound at first. But then it came again, unmistakable, an engine growing louder as it approached. Panic surged through us. We doused the fire as quickly as we could, plunging the cabin into darkness, and huddled together in the corner farthest from the door. We waited, hardly daring to breathe, as the engine's rumble grew closer, then cut off. Car doors slammed, and low, gruff voices reached our ears. "You sure you left it here?" One voice said, sharp and impatient. "Positive," another replied. "No one ever comes out this way. It's the perfect hiding spot." Footsteps crunched on the gravel outside, and my heart pounded so hard I was sure they'd hear it. Beside me, I could feel Mia trembling, her breath shallow and quick. The cabin door swung open with a creak, and flashlight beams swept across the room. We pressed ourselves deeper into the corner, praying the shadows would hide us. "What the hell?" One of the men said, his voice low and dangerous. "The bag's been moved. Someone's been here." The other growled, his tone menacing. "Recently, too." "Look at the fireplace." I closed my eyes, certain we were done for, that they'd find us and who knew what they'd do. But then a miracle, a long, mournful howl echoed through the forest, the cry of a wolf piercing the night. The men froze. "We need to move the stash," one said urgently. "If someone's been here, it's not safe anymore." "What about whoever was here?" the other asked. There was a tense pause, then a chilling reply. "We'll do a sweep of the area. If we find them, well, these woods are a dangerous place." Accident happened. I felt Alex tense beside me, ready to spring into action if we were discovered, but the men were already moving, grabbing the duffel bag and hurrying out of the cabin. The engine roared to life again, then faded into the distance. For several long minutes, we didn't move, didn't speak, barely breathed. Then Alex broke the silence. "We need to get out of here. Now." We grabbed our backpacks and slipped out of the cabin, the forest pitch black around us. We didn't dare use our flashlights, stumbling through the undergrowth, scratched by branches and tripping over roots, driven by pure adrenaline and fear. I don't know how long we walked, hours probably, but eventually, miraculously, we found a road. Not long after, headlights cut through the darkness, and a police cruiser slowed as we flagged it down, our relief overwhelming. We spilled out our story. The lost trail, the cabin, the money, the gun, the men who'd come in the night. The officer radioed it in, and soon the area was crawling with police. As it turned out, we'd stumbled upon a major drug operation. The cabin was a waypoint for smugglers moving narcotics across the border. Our accidental discovery led to several arrests and the seizure of millions of dollars worth of drugs. The press called us heroes, but even now, months later, I still have nightmares about that night, about what might have happened if that wolf hadn't howled, if those men had searched the cabin more thoroughly. Sometimes, when I'm walking alone at night, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched, that somewhere out there, someone is waiting to settle the score. I used to love the outdoors, the peace and solitude of the forest, but now I stick to well-traveled paths and crowded campgrounds. Because I know firsthand that in the deep woods, you never know what or who you might find. The forest was alive with the sounds of nature, chirping crickets, rustling leaves, and the distant call of a night bird, But beneath it all, there was an unsettling undercurrent, a whisper of something off that I couldn't quite place. It was as if the woods themselves were murmuring secrets, just out of earshot, daring anyone foolish enough to listen too closely. We were a tight-knit group of me, Jake, Sarah, and Mark, bound by years of friendship and a shared love for adventure. But that night, the forest felt different, heavy with an ominous presence that set my nerves on edge. The day had started innocently enough. We'd set up camp in a clearing not far from a babbling creek, the sun high overhead casting dappled shadows through the canopy, painting the ground in a kaleidoscope of greens and golds. It was the perfect spot, secluded, serene, and far from the clamor of city life. We laughed and joked as we pitched our tents, the sense of freedom that only the wilderness can provide lifting our spirits. The air was warm, the breeze gentle, and for a while it felt like we'd escaped the weight of the world. As the afternoon wore on, we decided to explore the surrounding area, armed with a map, a compass, and our collective sense of adventure. We set off into the dense forest, following a faint path that was little more than a suggestion of where others might have walked before. Our footsteps crunched on the underbrush, and the chatter of birds overhead kept us company. We were deep in the woods when we stumbled upon the cabin. It stood in a small clearing, its weathered wooden walls sagging with age, as if it had been abandoned for decades. The door hung slightly ajar, creaking softly in the breeze, and the windows were coated in grime, barely letting light through. Curiosity got the better of us, and we approached cautiously, peering inside. The interior was sparse, a single room with a rickety table, a few broken chairs, and a thick layer of dust covering everything. Dust motes floated lazily in the slivers of sunlight that pierced the grimy windows. "Looks like no one's been here for a while," Jake said, his voice echoing slightly in the empty space, his tone more curious than concerned. "Yeah, but it's kind of creepy, right?" Sarah added, hugging her arms around herself as if warding off a chill. I nodded, feeling a twinge of unease. There was something about the place that felt wrong, like an itch at the back of my mind I couldn't scratch. The air inside was stale, heavy with the scent of mildew and decay, and the shadows seemed to cling to the corners a little too tightly. We lingered for a few moments, poking around the sparse furnishings, then decided to head back to camp. As we left, I glanced back at the cabin, its dark windows staring back like empty, unblinking eyes. By the time we returned to our campsite, the sun was dipping low, painting the sky in vibrant hues of orange and pink. We gathered around the campfire, its warmth a welcome comfort against the encroaching chill of evening. Laughter and stories filled the air, the crackling of the fire a soothing backdrop. We roasted marshmallows, the sweet, smoky scent mingling with the crisp pine air, and for a while, the unease from the cabin faded. But as night deepened, that sense of disquiet returned, subtle at first, a prickle at the back of my neck, a whisper of instinct urging me to stay alert. I tried to brush it off, blaming the eerie discovery of the cabin, but the feeling grew stronger, like a weight settling over me. It was past midnight when I heard it, the unmistakable crunch of footsteps on the underbrush, slow and deliberate, as if someone or something was taking care not to be heard. My heart skipped a beat, and I glanced at my friends, but they were lost in conversation, oblivious to the sound. I strained my ears, trying to pinpoint the source. The footsteps were faint but unmistakable, circling just beyond the glow of our fire. "Did you guys hear that?" I asked, my voice low, almost a whisper, not wanting to alarm them unnecessarily. "Hear what?" Mark replied, looking up from the fire, his brow furrowing. I held up a hand, signaling for silence, and we all paused, listening intently. For a moment, there was nothing but the crackle of the fire and the rustle of leaves in a breeze. Then it came again, closer this time, a soft crunch that sent a shiver down my spine. "Maybe it's just an animal," Jake suggested, though his voice lacked conviction, his eyes darting nervously to the tree line. "Maybe," I conceded, though I wasn't convinced. Animals didn't move like that, cautious, almost predatory. We sat in tense silence, the jovial mood from earlier evaporating. The night seemed to press in around us, the darkness thick and suffocating, the fire's light barely holding it at bay. I could feel the weight of unseen eyes watching from the shadows, a sensation that made my skin crawl. Eventually, the footsteps faded, and with them, the oppressive feeling of being watched. We tried to laugh it off, blaming overactive imaginations and the eerie ambience of the forest, but the unease lingered, a shadow that logic couldn't dispel. Sleep was hard to come by that night. I lay in my tent, my mind replaying the sound of those footsteps, searching for answers that wouldn't come. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig felt amplified in the stillness, keeping me on edge. It was well past midnight when I finally drifted into a restless slumber, my dreams haunted by vague, unsettling images of figures lurking just out of sight. I woke with a start, the first light of dawn just beginning to filter through the tent's fabric, casting a soft, grayish glow. For a moment, I lay still, disoriented, unsure what had roused me. Then I heard it, a soft rustling, the unmistakable sound of something moving just outside. My heart pounded, and I sat up, straining to see through the dim light. The rustling stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that seemed to stretch on forever. I held my breath, listening intently, but heard nothing more. Cautiously, I unzipped the tent and stepped outside. The morning air was crisp, the forest bathed in a gentle glow of early light. Everything seemed normal, the creek gurgled softly, birds began their morning chorus, but the sense of unease clung to me like damp clothing. As my friends emerged from their tents, their expressions mirrored my own, wary, uncertain, the weight of the previous night's events etched on their faces. "Did anyone else hear something this morning?" I asked, breaking the silence. Sarah nodded, her face pale. "Yeah, it sounded like someone was moving around." Jake and Mark exchanged glances, their expressions grim. "I thought I heard something too," Mark admitted. "But when I looked outside, there was nothing." We spent the morning scouring the area, looking for signs of intruders or animals that might explain the noises. We checked the ground for footprints, examined branches for breaks, but the forest revealed no secrets. There were no tracks, no signs of disturbance, nothing to suggest anyone had been there. As the day wore on, the sense of unease began to fade, replaced by the familiar camaraderie that had brought us together. We hiked along the creek, swam in its cool waters, and tried to reclaim the joy of our adventure. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the campsite, the feeling returned, stronger and more insistent. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. We gathered around a campfire once more, the flickering flames casting dancing shadows on the trees. Laughter and conversation flowed, but there was an undercurrent of tension, a shared understanding that something wasn't right. As the night deepened, the sound of footsteps returned, circling the campsite just beyond the fire's light. This time, there was no denying it. Someone or something was out there. Panic set in as we huddled closer to the fire, our eyes darting nervously into the darkness. The footsteps grew louder, more insistent, and I could feel the weight of unseen eyes, watching, waiting. Suddenly, the footsteps stopped, replaced by a low, guttural growl that sent shivers down my spine. It was close, too close, and my heart raced with fear. "Stay together," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. We stood back to back, scanning the darkness, clutching makeshift weapons, branches, rocks, anything we could grab. The growl came again, closer still, and I could feel the presence lurking just beyond the firelight, its menace palpable. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the growling ceased, and the forest fell silent once more. We waited, tense and alert, but nothing happened. Whatever it was had retreated into the night. We didn't sleep, too afraid to let our guard down. As the first light of dawn broke, we packed up our camp in silence, each of us eager to leave the forest and its secrets behind. The hike back to civilization was quiet, the events of the past 2 nights weighing heavily on our minds. We never spoke of it again, each of us content to let the mystery remain unsolved, but the memory lingered, a reminder of the things that lurk in the shadows, waiting for the unwary. As we left, the forest returned to its usual serenity, the whispering leaves and chirping crickets masking its secrets. Yet, as we walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that the forest was bidding us farewell, or perhaps warning us never to return. The night air hung heavy with a stillness unique to the deep woods, a silence so profound it seemed to press against my ears, muffling the world. We were miles from the nearest town, enveloped in a realm of towering pines and whispering leaves, far from the chaos of daily life. The forest was supposed to be a sanctuary, a place where my family and I could find peace. But as darkness fell, it took on a menacing character, one that felt far from welcoming. Camping had been my idea. I wanted to give my kids, Emily and Jack, a taste of the wilderness, a chance to trade their screens for the stars. My wife, Anna, had been hesitant at first, her brow furrowing at the thought of leaving the comforts of home. But I convinced her with promises of fresh air, family bonding, and nights spent under a vast, starry sky. So we packed up a car, stuffing it with camping gear, snacks, and the kids' boundless enthusiasm, and drove to a remote campsite far off the beaten path. The journey was long, the road winding through dense forests, but the kids' excitement from the back seat kept the mood light. We arrived at the lakeside campground in the late afternoon, the sun low on the horizon, casting a golden glow across the landscape. The clearing was idyllic, nestled near a babbling stream, its gentle ripples over smooth rocks a soothing backdrop. The kids ran off to explore, their laughter echoing through the trees as they darted between trunks and splashed in the shallow water. Anna and I set up the tent with practiced ease, working together to hammer stakes and secure guy lines, the familiar routine grounding us. By the time the tent was up, Emily and Jack were back, their cheeks flushed with excitement, clutching handfuls of smooth pebbles they'd found by the stream. We cooked dinner over an open fire, the smoky scent of burning wood mingling with the earthy aroma of the forest. We roasted marshmallows, their gooey sweetness a hit with the kids, and told stories as the sky deepened to a rich indigo, speckled with stars. For a while, it felt like everything I'd hoped for, a perfect escape. As night settled in, a chill crept into the air, and we retreated to the warmth of our tent. The kids fell asleep almost instantly, worn out from their adventures, their soft snores a comforting rhythm. Anna and I lay side by side, listening to the forest's symphony, the rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, the gentle gurgle of the stream. But just as I was drifting off, a sound shattered the calm, a scream sharp and sudden, slicing through the night like a knife. I bolted upright, my heart pounding, straining to listen. For a moment, there was nothing but the usual forest sounds, and I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, a trick of the wind. But then it came again, unmistakable, a long drawn-out scream, filled with terror that sent chills racing down my spine. It was distant but not distant enough, echoing through the trees with a raw, desperate edge. I felt Anna stir beside me, her hand finding mine in the darkness, her fingers cold. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible, trembling with unease. "Yeah," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady, though my pulse raced. "I heard it." We lay there, tense and alert, listening for any other sounds, but the scream didn't repeat. Instead, the forest seemed to hold its breath, the silence pressing in around us, heavy and oppressive. "Maybe it was an animal," Anna suggested, her tone hopeful but unconvinced. We both knew it didn't sound like any animal we'd ever heard. Not a coyote, not an owl, nothing natural. "Maybe," I agreed, though doubt gnawed at me. The scream had been too human, too filled with fear. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that we weren't as alone in these woods as we'd thought. Exhaustion eventually won out, and I drifted into an uneasy sleep, haunted by dreams of shadowy figures lurking just beyond the trees, their eyes glinting in the darkness. I awoke at dawn, the early light filtering through the tent, casting everything in a soft, golden glow. Anna was already up, sitting by the smoldering remains of the fire, her face drawn and pale, her eyes scanning the tree line. The kids were still asleep, their peaceful expression the stark contrast to the tension hanging in the air. "Morning," I said, trying to sound cheerful as I joined her, though my voice felt forced. "Morning," she replied, her gaze flicking to me briefly before returning to the trees. "Did you sleep?" "Not much," I admitted, rubbing the back of my neck. "You?" "Barely," she said, rubbing her arms as if to ward off a chill. "I kept thinking about that scream." "Yeah, me too," I said, glancing at the kids' tent. "But they didn't hear it, right?" "No, thank God," she said, shaking her head. "I don't want them to be scared." We spent the morning trying to shake off the unease, focusing on the kids and their boundless energy. They were oblivious, caught up in their own world of exploration, collecting more rocks, chasing each other through the clearing, splashing in the stream. We hiked along the water's edge, the kids skipping stones and giggling, and for a while, the beauty of our surroundings helped push the previous night's fear to the back of my mind. But as the day wore on, the sense of unease returned, subtle at first, a prickling at the back of my neck, a feeling of being watched. I tried to ignore it, chalking it up to nerves and lack of sleep, but as the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange, the feeling grew stronger, like an itch I couldn't scratch. We returned to camp as dusk fell, the forest cloaked in lengthening shadows, the air heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth. We cooked dinner over the fire, but the conversation was stilted, the kids' usual chatter subdued, as if they sensed the tension radiating from Anna and me. Laughter felt forced, the warmth of the fire doing little to dispel the growing chill in my bones. As night fell, the forest seemed to close in around us, the darkness thick and impenetrable, swallowing the edges of our campsite. We sat by the fire, its flickering flames casting dancing shadows on the trees. The kids were tired, their eyelids drooping, and we tucked them into their sleeping bags, their soft snores a small comfort in the oppressive night. Anna and I sat in silence, the fire crackling softly, the vast night stretching out before us. I tried to relax, to focus on the warmth of the flames, but every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves set my nerves on edge. Then, just as I was beginning to think we'd imagined the previous night's events, it happened again, a scream, long and piercing, echoing through the trees. It was closer this time, the sound raw and desperate, carrying a weight of fear that made my stomach churn. Anna's hand gripped mine, her fingers cold and trembling. "What is that?" she whispered, her voice tight with fear, her eyes wide as she stared into the darkness. "I don't know," I said, my mind racing, searching for an explanation that didn't exist. But we need to stay calm. We sat there, hearts pounding, waiting for something, anything to happen, but the scream didn't come again. The forest was silent, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the distant call of an owl. We stayed up for hours, our eyes scanning the darkness, every shadow a potential threat. The air felt charged, as if the forest itself was watching us, waiting. But nothing else happened. Eventually, exhaustion overcame fear, and we retreated to the tent. Though sleep remained elusive, my mind replaying the scream, the terror in its pitch haunting me. The next morning, the tension was palpable. The kids sensed it too, their usual exuberance dampened, their questions quieter, their glances more cautious. We decided to cut the trip short, the promise of adventure overshadowed by the events of the past 2 nights. As we packed up camp, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, as if unseen eyes were tracking our every move. The forest, once a place of beauty and tranquility, now felt oppressive, a realm of secrets and shadows that seemed to press closer with every step. We hiked back to the car in silence, the kids clinging to our sides, their small hands gripping ours tightly. As we drove away, the trees closing in behind us like a curtain, I couldn't help but glance back, half expecting to see something or someone watching us leave. The drive home was quiet, each of us lost in our own thoughts. The kids fell asleep in the back seat, their faces peaceful, unaware of the fear that had gripped us. Anna and I exchanged glances, a silent understanding passing between us. We didn't have answers, but we were safe, and that was enough. When we reached home, the familiar sights and sounds of our neighborhood were a welcome comfort, the events of the past 2 nights fading like a distant nightmare. But the memory lingered, a reminder of the unknown lurking just beyond the edge of the familiar. We never spoke of it again, each of us content to let the mystery remain unsolved. But sometimes, in the quiet of the night, I find myself listening for that scream, wondering what or who was out there in the darkness, and hoping that whatever it was, it stayed far away from us. The first thing that hit me was the smell, a putrid, sickening stench, like rotting meat left to fester under a blazing sun. It was so overpowering I could almost taste it, a foul film coating my tongue that made me gag. Little did I know, that nauseating odor was just the beginning of a nightmare that would haunt me for years to come. What was supposed to be a perfect family vacation had spiraled into something far darker, something that would change the way I saw the world forever. My wife, Lisa, our 2 kids, Tommy and Sarah, and I had been planning this camping trip for months. It was meant to be a chance to disconnect from our devices, to reconnect with nature and each other. The lake we'd chosen was off the beaten path, a hidden gem promising solitude and pristine wilderness. As we drove down the winding dirt road, the kids bounced with excitement in the back seat, their chatter filling the car with a contagious energy. I felt a surge of anticipation. This was going to be an adventure we'd never forget, a chance to make memories that would last a lifetime. We arrived at the lakeside campground in the late afternoon, the sun hanging low, casting a golden glow across the water's surface. The scene was almost too perfect, clear water lapping gently at the shore, surrounded by towering pines that stood like silent sentinels. We set about pitching our tent, working together with an ease born of countless family outings. The kids ran off to explore, their laughter echoing through the clearing as they darted between trees and skipped stones across the lake. "Daddy, look what I found," Sarah called out, her little face beaming as she held up a shiny, smooth rock she discovered by the water's edge. I smiled, ruffling her hair. "That's great, sweetie. Why don't you find some more for us to skip later?" She scampered off, her ponytail bouncing, while Tommy chased after her, eager to join the hunt. As Lisa and I finished setting up camp, hammering the last tent stakes into the soft earth, she came up beside me, wrapping an arm around my waist. "This is perfect," she said, leaning her head on my shoulder, her voice soft with contentment. "Just what we needed." I nodded, taking in the peaceful scene, the kids' laughter, the gentle ripple of the lake, the warm glow of the setting sun. But then a breeze stirred, carrying with it that first whiff of something rancid. I wrinkled my nose, turning to Lisa. "Do you smell that?" She frowned, sniffing the air, her expression shifting to one of mild disgust. "Yeah, it's weird. Like something died nearby, maybe?" I shrugged it off, figuring it was probably just an animal carcass decomposing in the woods. Nature could be brutal after all. "Probably nothing," I said, trying to sound reassuring, though a faint unease settled in my chest. We went back to setting up camp, but as the evening wore on, the smell seemed to intensify, growing from an unpleasant background note to a near-overwhelming stench. By the time we were roasting marshmallows over the campfire, the kids were noticeably bothered. Tommy kept asking, his voice tinged with annoyance, "Can we move to a different spot? It smells bad here." Even Sarah, usually oblivious to such things, wrinkled her nose and complained, holding her marshmallow stick at arm's length. Lisa glanced at me, her brow creased with concern. "Maybe we should take a look around tomorrow," she suggested as we prepared for bed, tucking the kids into their sleeping bags. "See if we can find the source." I nodded, trying to ignore the way my stomach churned, the unease growing like a shadow. "Yeah, good idea. I'm sure it's nothing to worry about." But as I lay in the tent that night, listening to the gentle lapping of the lake and the soft breathing of my family, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. The smell seemed to seep through the tent's fabric, heavy and oppressive, making it hard to relax. I must have dozed off eventually, because I was jolted awake by a loud splash, like something large had fallen or jumped into the lake. I sat up, heart pounding, straining my ears in the darkness. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, thick and heavy. Then I heard it, a low guttural sound, somewhere between a growl and a moan, coming from the direction of the lake. It sent a chill down my spine, cold and sharp. "Lisa," I whispered, shaking her gently. "Lisa, wake up." She stirred, mumbling sleepily. "What is it?" "Shoo," I said, putting a finger to my lips. "Listen." We sat in tense silence, and after a moment, the sound came again, louder, more distinct. Lisa's eyes widened, her hand gripping my arm tightly, her nails digging into my skin. "What is that?" she whispered, her voice trembling with fear. I shook my head, reaching for the flashlight we kept by our sleeping bags, its cold metal reassuring in my hand. "I don't know, but I'm going to check it out." Lisa grabbed my arm, her grip tightening. "Are you crazy? You can't go out there." But my curiosity, or maybe my need to protect my family, overrode my fear. "I'll be careful," I promised, my voice steadier than I felt. "Just stay here with the kids." The night air was cool against my skin as I stepped out of the tent, flashlight clutched tightly, its beam cutting through the darkness. The smell hit me again, stronger than ever, making me gag as I swept the light across the campsite. At first, everything seemed normal: the tent, the smoldering fire pit, the scattered camping gear. Then I turned the beam toward the lake. The water's surface rippled gently, reflecting the moonlight, but near the far shore, I caught a glimpse of something: two glowing points of light, reflecting my flashlight's beam. My breath caught in my throat. Whatever it was big, far bigger than any animal I'd expect to find in these woods. Bigger than a deer, bigger than a bear. As I stood frozen, the eyes began to move, gliding toward me through the water with a slow, deliberate purpose. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight, panic surging through me. "Lisa," I called out, my voice cracking. "Get the kids. We need to go now." I heard rustling from the tent, Lisa's confused voice asking, "What's wrong?" But I couldn't tear my eyes from the lake, from those eyes steadily closing the distance. The thing in the water let out another moaning growl, louder now, close enough that I could hear the splash of its movement. In the beam of my flashlight, I caught a glimpse of something breaking the surface, a shape that was all wrong, too large, too alien, with limbs that moved in ways that defied nature. Lisa emerged from the tent, the kids trailing behind her, rubbing sleep from their eyes, their faces pale and confused. "What's going on?" she demanded, but then she saw my face, followed my gaze to the lake, and gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Get to the car," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though my heart was racing. "Now." We ran, the kids crying, their confusion and fear piercing the night. I scooped up Sarah, her small body trembling in my arms, while Lisa grabbed Tommy's hand, pulling him toward the car parked at the edge of the clearing. As we reached the vehicle, I heard a sound that will haunt me forever, a wet, slapping noise, like something massive and heavy dragging itself out of the water. I didn't dare look back, focusing instead on yanking open the car door and practically throwing Sarah into the back seat. Lisa and Tommy scrambled in, and I slammed the driver's side door shut, fumbling with the keys, my hand shaking. In the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of it, a massive, dark shape, glistening wet in the moonlight, moving toward us with a speed that seemed impossible for its size. The engine roared to life, and I slammed the car into reverse, tires spinning in the dirt as we fishtailed onto the road. As we sped away, I saw it clearly for the first time, illuminated by the moonlight in the car's taillights. It was, I don't know how to describe it. Huge, easily the size of a bear, but its shape was wrong. Too many limbs, moving in unnatural, jerky motions that made my skin crawl. The smell, that rancid, rotting stench, was overwhelming, even through the closed windows. We tore down the dirt road, the car bouncing and shuddering over ruts and rocks. In the rearview mirror, I could see it following, keeping pace with an unnatural grace, its form a dark blur against the trees. It wasn't until we hit the paved road, the forest giving way to open fields, that we finally started to pull ahead, the shape fading into the distance. We drove for hours, not stopping until we reached a gas station on the outskirts of a small town, the sun just peeking over the horizon. We were all shaken, pale, and silent, the kids huddled together in the back seat, their eyes wide with lingering fear. Lisa turned to me, her voice trembling. What was that thing?" she asked, her face a mask of fear and confusion. I shook my head, still trying to process what I'd seen, my hands gripping the steering wheel to stop their shaking. "I don't know," I said, my voice hoarse. "I don't know." We reported the incident to the local authorities, but their skepticism was palpable. A camping trip gone wrong, they said, probably just a bear that spooked us in the dark. But I know what we saw, what we all saw. That wasn't a bear. We never went camping again after that night. The kids still have nightmares sometimes, waking up crying about the thing in the lake. Lisa and I don't talk about it much, the memory too raw, too unsettling. But sometimes when I catch a whiff of something rotten on the breeze or pass by a large body of water, I'm right back there, back at that lake with that thing coming for us. I don't know what we encountered that night, some undiscovered species, a genetic mutation, or something else entirely, something beyond our understanding. All I know is that it was real, it was terrifying, and it's still out there, lurking in the dark waters, waiting to emerge and hunt again. So if you're ever camping by a remote lake and catch a whiff of something foul on the wind, my advice is simple: pack up and leave immediately. because you never know what might be waiting beneath the surface, watching, ready for its next meal. I've always loved the woods, their quiet beauty a refuge from the chaos of the world, but now they fill me with dread. It's been 3 years since that camping trip, yet I still wake up in a cold sweat, the echo of those eerie whispers ringing in my ears. I can't shake the feeling that we were never alone out there, that something was watching us, hunting us. Worst of all, I'm haunted by the fear that it never stopped. It was supposed to be a celebration. The 5 of us, me, my best friends Jake and Emily, and our new college friends Zach and Lily, had just finished our final exams, marking the end of our junior year. We wanted to commemorate it with an adventure, something to shake off the stress of the past few weeks. Emily suggested a camping trip in the national forest a few hours from campus, a place she'd read about online, known for its pristine beauty and clear night skies. It sounded perfect, a chance to unwind, connect with nature, and just be together. We set out early on a Friday morning, our car packed to the brim with tents, sleeping bags, and enough food and beer to last the weekend. The drive was filled with laughter and excited chatter, plans for the summer spilling out as we left the highway and turned onto a winding forest road. The trees grew denser, their branches forming a canopy that filtered the sunlight into dappled patterns on the hood of the car. It felt like we were entering another world, one far removed from deadlines and lecture halls. We arrived at the campsite in the early afternoon, a small clearing surrounded by towering pines that stretched toward the sky. It was more isolated than I'd expected, the silence broken only by the rustle of leaves and the occasional bird call. "Are you sure this is the right place?" I asked Emily as we started unloading the car, my voice tinged with uncertainty. She nodded, consulting her phone with a confident smile. "Yep, this is it." The ranger at the station said it's one of the more remote sites, perfect for stargazing. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and soon we were all caught up in the excitement of setting up camp. We worked together to pitch the tents, hammering stakes into the soft earth and stringing up tarps, while Jake and Zach gathered firewood, their playful banter echoing through the clearing. By the time the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, we had a cozy camp ready, complete with a crackling fire. As dusk turned to night, we sat around a campfire, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories. The forest came alive with the sounds of night, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, the gentle sigh of the wind through the pines. It was peaceful, almost magical, the kind of moment you want to hold on to forever. But then I felt it, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, like someone was watching me. I turned, peering into the darkness beyond the fire's glow, but saw nothing. Shaking it off, I tried to focus on Zach's animated retelling of a prank he'd pulled in freshman year, his hands waving as he described the chaos. But the feeling persisted, a nagging sense of unease that grew stronger as the evening wore on. I found myself glancing over my shoulder, searching the shadows, my heart beating a little faster. Once or twice, I could have sworn I saw movement among the trees, a flicker of something dark, but when I looked directly, there was nothing there. "You okay, Alex?" Jake asked, noticing my distraction, his brow furrowing with concern. I forced a smile, trying to push the unease aside. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just not used to being out in the wilderness, I guess." My voice sounded unconvincing even to me, but he nodded, turning back to the conversation. As the fire burned low and the night grew colder, we decided to turn in. Zach and Lily shared one tent. Jake and Emily took another, leaving me alone in the third. As I zipped up the tent flap, that feeling of being watched intensified, a heavy weight that made my skin crawl. I lay in my sleeping bag, staring at the canvas ceiling, listening to the night sounds of the forest, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. That's when I heard it, a whisper, so faint I thought I'd imagined it, like a breath carried on the wind. But then it came again, clearer, a soft murmur in a language I couldn't understand. It sent a chill down my spine, cold and sharp, and I sat up, heart pounding. The whispers seemed to come from just outside my tent, surrounding me, their cadence unnatural, almost rhythmic. "Hello." I called out softly, thinking maybe one of my friends was playing a prank, my voice trembling despite my effort to sound calm. But there was no response, just more whispers growing louder, seeming to come from all directions now, as if the forest itself was speaking. Gathering my courage, I unzipped the tent and peered out. The clearing was bathed in moonlight, casting long shadows from the trees. And there, at the edge of the campsite, I saw them, dark shapes moving between the pines, too tall to be animals, their movements unnaturally fluid, almost gliding. They didn't look human, their proportions wrong, their limbs too long and angular. My breath caught in my throat, and I scrambled out of the tent, rushing to wake the others. "Guys," I hissed, shaking Jake awake, my voice urgent. "There's something out there." Groggy, my friends emerged from their tents, rubbing sleep from their eyes. "What's going on?" Emily asked, her voice thick with confusion, her hair mussed from sleep. "Listen," I said, my voice low, urgent. We stood in silence, and after a moment, the whispers came again, soft but unmistakable, a chorus of voices that seemed to weave through the trees. I saw the color drain from my friends' faces as they heard it too, their eyes wide with fear. "What the hell is that?" Zach whispered, his voice tight, his hands clenching into fists. Before anyone could answer, twigs snapped loudly in the forest, sharp and deliberate. We all whirled toward the sound, and there, just beyond the edge of our campsite, stood a figure. It was hard to make out in the darkness, but its proportions were off, too tall, too thin, its limbs bent at odd angles, like a marionette cut loose from its strings. Lily let out a strangled scream, the sound piercing the night. The figure jerked at the noise, and then, impossibly fast, it was gone, vanishing into the trees with a speed that defied reason. "We need to get out of here," Jake said, his voice steady despite the panic in his eyes, already moving toward the car. No, we didn't bother packing up. We grabbed our phones and car keys and ran, piling into the vehicle in a frantic scramble. As Jake started the engine, I looked back at our campsite, and what I saw made my blood run cold. More figures were emerging from the trees, dozens of them, all with that same unnatural, twisted shape, their movements jerky yet purposeful. They were moving toward us, closing the distance with an eerie, coordinated grace. Jake floored it, the car fishtailing on the dirt road as we sped away, gravel crunching under the tires. In the rearview mirror, I could see the figures giving chase, their forms a blur of wrongness, moving with an inhuman speed that kept them just at the edge of visibility. "What are they?" Emily sobbed from the back seat, her voice breaking as she clutched Lily's hand. "I don't know," I said, my voice shaking, my eyes locked on the rearview mirror. "Just drive, Jake. Drive." We tore down the forest road, the car bouncing violently over ruts and roots, branches scraping against the windows. Every time I looked back, the figures were still there, always just close enough to see, never falling behind despite our speed. It wasn't until we hit the main highway, the forest giving way to open fields, that they finally disappeared from view, swallowed by the darkness. We drove in tense silence for hours, jumping at every shadow, half expecting those twisted shapes to appear in front of us at any moment. We didn't stop until we reached the outskirts of our college town, the familiar streets offering a small measure of comfort, though my heart still raced. We went straight to campus security, babbling our story to the bewildered night guard. He clearly didn't believe us, his eyes skeptical, his tone dismissive, but he called the local police anyway. The official report chalked it up to an overactive imagination, fueled by campfire stories and too much beer. They sent a patrol to the campsite the next day, finding our abandoned gear, but no sign of any intruders. Case closed. But we know what we saw, what we heard. In the days and weeks that followed, we tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a group of pranksters in costumes. Maybe we'd eaten some bad mushrooms by accident. But deep down, we knew the truth. Something inhuman was out there in those woods. Something that didn't belong in our world. We never went camping again after that night. The five of us stayed close, bonded by our shared terror, but we rarely talked about what happened. It was too terrifying, too unbelievable. Yet sometimes, late at night, I still hear those whispers, faint and fleeting, like a memory I can't shake. I'll wake up in a cold sweat, certain that if I open my eyes, I'll see one of those twisted figures standing over my bed, its two long limbs reaching out. And sometimes, when I'm walking alone at night, I get that same prickling sensation on the back of my neck, that feeling of being watched. I've done research since then, diving into folklore, conspiracy theories, anything that might explain what we encountered. I found stories from around the world, tales of strange figures in the woods, whispers and languages no one understands. Some call them forest spirits, others aliens, some even interdimensional beings slipping through cracks in our reality. I don't know what to believe anymore. All I know is that the world is stranger and more terrifying than I ever imagined. And somewhere out there, in the dark heart of the forest, those things are still waiting, watching, whispering. So if you're ever camping in the woods and feel like you're being watched, if you hear whispers on the wind that don't sound quite human, don't ignore it. Don't try to rationalize it away. Pack up your things and leave, because you never know what might be lurking just beyond the firelight, waiting for its chance to step out of the shadows. The forest was supposed to be my sanctuary, a haven where I could escape the clamor and chaos of everyday life and find peace in the embrace of nature. But as I stood there, staring at the twisted metal and rusted teeth of a trap hidden beneath a pile of leaves, I realized that even here, danger lurked in the shadows, silent and unseen. I come to the woods seeking solitude and tranquility, but what I found was a stark reminder that the wilderness holds its own perils, often concealed just out of sight, waiting for the unwary. I'd always loved camping alone. There was something profoundly calming about being surrounded by nothing but the rustle of leaves, the distant call of birds, and the whisper of the wind through the trees. It was my way of resetting, of finding balance in a world that often felt overwhelming with its endless demands. So when I had a few days off work, I packed my gear, tent, sleeping bag, a small stove, and enough supplies for a long weekend, loaded it into my old pickup truck, and headed out to one of my favorite spots, a secluded area deep in the heart of the national forest. The drive was long but soothing, the road winding through dense stands of pine and oak, the sunlight filtering through the leaves in golden shafts that danced across the windshield. By mid-morning, I reached the trailhead, shouldered my pack, and set off into the woods, the familiar crunch of pine needles under my boots grounding me in a moment. The trail was one I'd walked many times before, a narrow path that twisted and turned through the forest, leading me deeper into the wilderness. By early afternoon, I arrived at my usual campsite, a small clearing near a babbling brook, its waters sparkling in the sunlight, the ground carpeted with soft moss and fallen leaves. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the clean scent of pine, and the sky stretched above a clear, endless blue. It was perfect, exactly as I'd remembered it. I set up my tent with practiced ease, staking it firmly into the earth, and gathered firewood, stacking it neatly beside a small fire pit I'd used on previous trips. I settled in for a few days of relaxation and reflection, the weight of the world already slipping from my shoulders. The first day passed in a blissful haze. I hiked along the brook, its gentle murmur a constant companion, and spent hours reading a worn paperback, losing myself in its pages. The forest was alive with small sounds, birds flitting between branches, the occasional rustle of a squirrel in the underbrush, and I felt at peace, connected to the world in a way I never could in the city. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in vibrant hues of pink and orange, I built a fire, the crackle of burning wood mingling with the scent of pine. I cooked a simple meal, beans and rice heated over the flames, and sat by the fire, savoring the smoky aroma and the warmth against the evening chill. The stars came out, twinkling through the canopy, a reminder of how small we are in the grand scheme of things. I slept soundly that night, lulled by the brook's gentle song and the rustle of leaves in the breeze, my dreams filled with the quiet beauty of the forest. But the next morning, as I set out to explore a new trail, I stumbled upon something that shattered the peace of my sanctuary. I was following a narrow deer track, the ground soft beneath my boots, the air filled with the earthy scent of moss and damp soil. As I stepped over a fallen log, I noticed something glinting in the underbrush, half hidden by a pile of leaves. Curious, I crouched down and brushed the debris aside, revealing a trap, a steel-jawed monstrosity, its rusted teeth sharp and menacing despite its age. My heart skipped a beat, and I took a step back, my mind racing. Who would set traps out here, in the middle of nowhere? The thought was unsettling, a jarring intrusion into what had been a perfect escape. The trap looked old, its metal pitted with rust, but was still deadly, designed to snap shut on anything or anyone that triggered it. I carefully marked the spot with a piece of bright orange cloth from my pack, tying it to a nearby branch to warn off any unsuspecting animals or hikers, my hands trembling slightly as I worked. The discovery cast a shadow over my mood, tainting the joy of my solitude. I continued my hike, but the thrill of exploration was gone, replaced by a nagging sense of unease. The forest, once a place of comfort, now felt watchful, its silence heavier than before. Later that day, I found 2 more traps, each one hidden with the same care, nestled under leaves or tucked beside fallen logs. Their presence was a stark reminder of the unseen dangers lurking in the woods, and I couldn't shake the thought that someone had placed them deliberately, perhaps not so long ago. By the time I returned to camp, the sun was low, casting long shadows across the forest floor, the clearing bathed in a golden twilight glow. I tried to shake off the unease, telling myself the traps were probably relics left by some long-gone poacher, forgotten in the undergrowth. But the thought lingered, a persistent whisper at the back of my mind that refused to be silenced. That night, as I sat by the fire, the forest felt different, darker, more oppressive, as if it were holding its breath. The usual chorus of night sounds, the chirping of crickets, the soft hoot of an owl, was muted, replaced by a stillness that pressed in from all sides. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that unseen eyes were tracking my every move from the shadows. I tried to focus on the warmth of the fire, the comforting crackle of burning wood, but my nerves were on edge, my senses heightened. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, made me jump, my eyes darting to the darkness beyond the firelight. I found myself gripping the handle of my camping knife, its weight a small reassurance in my hand, though I knew it would do little against whatever might be out there. Exhaustion eventually won out, and I retreated to my tent, though sleep was elusive. I lay awake for hours, listening to the forest, each sound amplified in the stillness. My mind replayed the image of those traps, their rusted jaws gleaming in the sunlight, and I couldn't help but wonder who or what had set them. It was well past midnight when I finally drifted off, my dreams filled with shadowy figures and hidden dangers, the forest transforming into a maze of unseen threats. I awoke with a start, the first light of dawn just beginning to filter through the tent's fabric, casting a soft, grayish glow. For a moment, I lay still, disoriented, unsure what had roused me. Then I heard it, a soft rustling, the unmistakable sound of something moving just outside, brushing against the underbrush. My heart pounded, and I sat up, straining to see through the dim light, my breath shallow. The rustling stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that seemed to stretch on forever, heavy and oppressive. I held my breath, listening intently, but heard nothing more. Cautiously, I unzipped the tent and stepped outside, the morning air crisp and cool against my skin. The forest was bathed in the gentle glow of early light, the brook sparkling as it caught the first rays of the sun. Everything seemed normal, the clearing quiet, the birds beginning their morning chorus, but the sense of unease clung to me, a weight I couldn't shake. I spent the morning checking the perimeter of my camp, moving slowly, my eyes scanning the ground for any signs of intruders or animals that might explain the noises. I looked for footprints, broken branches, anything out of place, but the forest revealed no secrets. The mossy ground was undisturbed, the underbrush intact, as if nothing had been there. As the day wore on, the sense of unease began to fade, replaced by the familiar rhythm of camp life. I hiked along the brook, its waters cool and refreshing, and fished for a while, casting my line into the clear stream, the simple act grounding me. I tried to reclaim the beauty of my surroundings, the peace I'd come here to find, but as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the clearing, the feeling returned, stronger and more insistent, like a warning whispered by the trees. That evening, as I sat by the fire, the forest seemed to close in around me, the darkness thick and impenetrable, swallowing the edges of the clearing. The usual sounds of the night were absent, replaced by a silence that pressed in on all sides, heavy and suffocating. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, as if unseen eyes were tracking my every move, their gaze cold and unyielding. I tried to relax, telling myself it was just my imagination, that the traps had put me on edge, but the feeling only grew stronger, a persistent whisper at the back of my mind that refused to be ignored. Then, just as I was beginning to think I'd imagined the events of the past 2 days, I heard it, a low guttural growl echoing through the trees, deep and resonant. vibrating in my chest. It was close, too close, and my heart raced with fear, my pulse pounding in my ears. I stood up, scanning the darkness, my eyes searching for the source of the sound, the firelight casting flickering shadows that seemed to move on their own. The growl came again, closer still, and I could feel the presence lurking just beyond the firelight, its menace palpable, like a predator sizing up its prey. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice steady despite the fear gripping me, my hand tightening around the knife at my side. There was no response, just the sound of the wind in the trees and the crackling of the fire, but the growl didn't come again, and the forest fell silent once more. I didn't sleep that night, too afraid to let my guard down. I sat by the fire, my eyes scanning the darkness, every shadow a potential threat, the knife never leaving my hand. The hours crawled by, each one heavier than the last, until the first light of dawn broke, painting the sky in pale pinks and golds. I packed up my camp in silence, my movements quick and deliberate, eager to leave the forest and its secrets behind. As I hiked back to the trailhead, the events of the past few days weighed heavily on my mind, a burden I couldn't shake. I never spoke of it again, content to let the mystery remain unsolved, but the memory lingered, a reminder of the things that lurk in the shadows, waiting for the unwary. The forest, once my refuge, had revealed its darker side, and I knew I'd never see it the same way again. I never thought a simple act of kindness could spiral into the most terrifying night of my life, but as I sit here, hands still trembling, staring at the phone that just buzzed with a message that sent ice through my veins, I realize how naive I was. Sometimes it's better to leave things alone. It all started 2 days ago when my brother Jake and I set out for a camping trip we've been planning for months, a chance to reconnect, to escape the grind of our hectic lives, and to relive the carefree summers we spent as kids exploring the woods behind our parents' house. We chose a remote spot in the Cascadia National Forest, a rugged 4-hour hike from the nearest road. We craved solitude and adventure. We got far more than we bargained for. The hike in was breathtaking. Early autumn had set the forest ablaze with color, crimson, gold, and amber leaves painting the canopy above us. Jake and I fell into an easy rhythm, our boots crunching on the pine needle-strewn trail as we swapped stories about work, relationships, and our dreams for the future. It was the kind of conversation we hadn't had in years, free from the ping of notifications or the weight of responsibilities. The air was crisp, carrying the earthy scent of moss and the faint tang of sap. Squirrels darted through the underbrush, and a hawk circled lazily overhead. It felt good to talk, to laugh, to just be brothers again. By late afternoon, we reached our campsite, perfect clearing nestled beside a bubbling stream, surrounded by towering pines that stood like silent sentinels. As we pitched our tent and gathered firewood, a sense of peace washed over me. This was exactly what we needed. That's when I saw it, a flash of color that didn't belong, half hidden behind a fallen log at the edge of the clearing. I wandered over to investigate, my curiosity piqued. It was a backpack, not some weathered relic but a high-end camping pack, the kind that costs a small fortune. "Hey, Jake," I called, waving him over. "Come look at this." He jogged over, his eyebrows shooting up as he spotted the bag. "Whoa, someone must have left it behind," he said, his voice tinged with surprise. I knelt down, running my hand over the sleek fabric. It was in pristine condition, no dirt, no wear, as if it had been placed there yesterday. "It looks brand new," I said, unzipping the main compartment. "Maybe someone forgot it recently." Inside, we found standard camping gear, a first aid kit, energy bars, a water filter. But there's also a wallet, a phone, and a small notebook. The wallet held a driver's license for Sarah Thompson, a blonde woman in her mid-20s with a bright smile. Her photo stared back at me, and a twinge of concern hit me. Had she gotten lost? Was she okay? "We should try to return it," I said, glancing at Jake. He nodded, picking up the phone. "Battery's dead, but yeah, we should definitely get this back to her." We debated our next move. The right thing would be to hike back to the ranger station and turn the backpack in, but we'd just set up camp, and the sun was already sinking, casting long shadows through the trees. Hiking 4 hours in the dark wasn't safe, so we decided to stay the night and head out at first light. That choice would haunt us. As night fell, we sat around our campfire, roasting marshmallows and savoring the forest quiet. The stream gurgled softly, and the air grew cool, carrying the scent of burning pine. But an undercurrent of unease settled over me. I kept glancing at the backpack, propped against a tree near our tent. It felt like an intruder, a reminder that we weren't as alone out here as we thought. Maybe we should check the notebook, Jake suggested, poking at the fire with a stick. There might be contact info or something to help us return it. I hesitated. It felt like prying, but he had a point. If there was a way to reach Sarah or her family, we owed it to her to try. I grabbed the notebook and opened it by the firelight, the orange glow flickering across the pages. The first few entries were ordinary, notes about trail conditions, a list of supplies, a sketch of a bird. But as I flipped further, the writing changed. It turned frantic, paranoid, filled with ramblings about being followed, about eyes watching from the trees. The handwriting grew jagged, some pages just scribbles, as if the writer's hand couldn't keep up with their fear. The final entry, dated 3 days ago, sent a chill through me. Asterisk, they're here. God help me. Asterisk, I showed Jake, watching the color drain from his face as he read. What the hell, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Before I could answer, a twig snapped in the darkness beyond the fire's glow. We both spun around, peering into the black wall of trees. For a moment, I thought I saw movement, a shadow darker than the night, shifting just out of sight. My pulse quickened. It's probably just an animal, Jake said, but his voice was thin, unconvincing. We tried to laugh it off, to tell ourselves our imaginations were running wild, but the unease clung to us like damp air. As we prepared for bed, every sound in the forest seemed amplified. Every rustle of leaves, every distant hoot of an owl felt like a warning. I lay in my sleeping bag, staring at the tent ceiling, unable to sleep. Jake's breathing steady beside me, but I stayed alert, my ears straining for any hint of danger. Then I heard it, crisp, deliberate footsteps, the crunch of leaves under something heavy. Something was circling our campsite. My heart slammed against my ribs. I shook Jake awake, whispering, "There's something out there." We lay still, barely breathing, as the footsteps continued, slow and purposeful, looping around the tent. They stopped right outside the entrance. My blood roared in my ears, every muscle coiled, ready to move. The tent zipper twitched, the metal teeth scraping softly. Jake and I locked eyes, panic mirroring panic. Without a word, we exploded out of our sleeping bags, tearing through the tent's back wall in a frenzy. We stumbled into the clearing, the dying embers of our fire casting a faint glow. That's when we saw them, dozens of eyes, glinting in the firelight, surrounding the clearing. They were moving closer. We ran. Blind panic drove us into the forest, branches whipping our faces, roots snagging our feet. We didn't care about direction, only escape. The sound of pursuit followed, crashing through the underbrush, too close, too fast. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but we kept going, driven by pure terror. I don't know how long we ran, minutes, hours. It felt endless. By some miracle, we burst onto a dirt road just as headlights cut through the dark. We flagged down the car, probably looking like lunatics in our pajamas, scratched and wild-eyed. The elderly couple inside was startled but kind, their faces creased with concern as they drove us to the nearest town. At the police station, we spilled our story to a skeptical deputy who took the backpack as evidence and jotted down our statement with a raised eyebrow. We spent the night in a cheap motel, jumping at every creek, unable to shake the feeling that we were still being watched. The next day, we drove home, shaken but relieved to be back in the familiar chaos of the city. I thought it was over. I thought we were safe. Then tonight, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. My fingers shook as I opened it. The screen showed a photo of Jake and me at our campfire that night, laughing unaware. It was taken from the tree line, the edges dark with leaves and branches. Below the image, a message, asterisk, found you. Thanks for returning my bag. Asterisk, I've triple-checked every lock on my doors and windows. I called Jake, warned him to be careful, but I know it's not enough. Whatever was out there in those woods, whatever hunted Sarah Thompson, is now hunting us. As I sit here in the dark, flinching at every creak of the house, every rustle of wind in the trees outside, one thought grips me. What if they're already here? The forest was a maze, each tree a silent guardian whispering secrets to the wind. We were confident, armed with maps, compasses, and the kind of bravado that comes with years of outdoor adventures. But as the sun sank below the horizon, casting long, twisting shadows across the trail, that confidence eroded, replaced by a creeping dread that clung to us like damp moss. The four of us, me, Sarah, Jake, and Mark, were bound by a decade of friendship and a shared love for the wilderness. This camping trip was meant to be a weekend escape, a chance to unplug from the world and reconnect with nature and each other. We'd set up camp near a serene lake, its mirror-like surface reflecting the sky, and spent the day hiking, laughing, and soaking in the freedom of the outdoors. It was supposed to be simple, joyful, break from the grind. But the forest had other plans. The afternoon was waning when we decided to take one last hike before dinner. The trail wound through dense forest, leading us deeper into the wilderness. Our laughter echoed through the trees, a comforting reminder of our bond. Sarah was telling a story about her latest work disaster, her voice animated, while Jake teased her about her knack for chaos. Mark and I trailed behind, swapping quips about old camping trips. The air was warm, scented with pine and earth, and the sunlight filtered through the canopy in golden patches. But as the light faded, the trail grew faint, little more than a suggestion of where others might have walked. We pressed on, certain we could find our way, our voices growing quieter as the forest thickened around us. The path vanished entirely, swallowed by a tangle of ferns and brambles. We stopped, pulling out the map and compass, trying to orient ourselves in the dimming light. The trees loomed closer, their shapes blurring into indistinct shadows, each one indistinguishable from next. "Are we lost?" Sarah asked, her voice edged with worry, her hands fidgeting with the strap of her backpack. "Of course not," Jake replied, but his tone lacked conviction, his eyes darting to the map. "We just need to retrace our steps." We turned back, but the way was unclear. The forest seemed to shift, the trees rearranging themselves in the fading light, their branches knitting together to block our path. The laughter that had filled the air earlier was gone, replaced by a heavy unease that settled in my chest like a stone. Panic began to creep in, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. "Maybe we should just head straight," Mark suggested, pointing in what he hoped was the direction of the lake. "It can't be far." With no better plan, we agreed, setting off again, our footsteps muffled by the carpet of leaves and pine needles. But the forest seemed to close in tighter, the trees pressing closer, the ground uneven and treacherous underfoot. The sky deepened to indigo, the first stars piercing through, and the air grew cooler, biting at our exposed skin. We walked in silence now, the only sounds the crunch of leaves beneath our boots and our own ragged breathing. My heart pounded, each step pulling us further from the safety of our camp. I glanced at my friends. Sarah's face was pale, her lips pressed tight. Jake's jaw was set, his eyes scanning the darkness. Mark's usual grin was gone, replaced by a tense frown. The camaraderie that had carried us through the day was fraying, replaced by a shared dread that none of us voiced. The forest felt alive, its shadows shifting just beyond our sight, as if it were watching, waiting. Then we stumbled upon it, a campsite, but not ours. It was abandoned, the fire pit cold and lifeless, its ashes scattered. A tent lay collapsed, its fabric torn and flapping in the breeze. Broken branches littered the ground and scattered belongings, a water bottle, a torn map, a single hiking boot, told a story of chaos frozen in time. The scene was wrong, unnatural, like something had erupted here and then vanished. "What happened here?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible, her eyes wide as she took in the wreckage. "I don't know," I said, my mind racing with possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. But we should keep moving. The discovery lit a fire under us, the need to find our way back now desperate. We pressed on, the forest a dark, oppressive presence, its branches clawing at our clothes. The night air was cold, sharp against our faces, and the stars above offered no comfort, only a reminder of how far we were from safety. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, as if unseen eyes tracked our every move. The forest was alive with sounds, rustling leaves, the distant call of an owl, but beneath it all was a heavy silence, a stillness that set my nerves on edge. Each step was a struggle, the darkness thick and impenetrable, wrapping around us like a shroud. Time stretched, the night an endless expanse of shadow and fear. My legs ached, my breath came in sharp gasps, but I pushed on, driven by the need to escape the forest's grip. Then, just as despair began to take hold, we heard it, a faint, unmistakable sound, the gentle lapping of water against the shore. Hope surged, a fragile spark in the darkness. We followed the sound, our steps quickening, the promise of safety pulling us forward. The sound grew louder, more distinct, and then we saw it. The lake, its surface shimmering in the moonlight, a beacon in the night. Relief crashed over me, a wave of emotion that left me trembling. We stumbled into our camp, exhausted but elated, the glow of our fire a welcome sight through the trees. We collapsed onto the ground, laughter and tears mingling as the tension of the night gave way to relief. We were safe together, and that was all that mattered. As we sat by the fire, the events of the night replayed in my mind, each moment sharp and vivid. The abandoned campsite, the feeling of being watched, the forest's suffocating presence. It was a reminder of its power, its mystery. It was beautiful, yes, but wild and untamed, a place where the line between reality and nightmare blurred. We never spoke of that campsite or the creeping dread that had followed us. Each of us seemed content to let the mystery lie, to bury it in the shadows of the trees. But the memory lingered, a quiet reminder of what lurks just beyond the firelight, waiting for the unwary. The forest had shown us its darker side, but we'd emerge unscathed, our friendship stronger for it, forged in the crucible of fear. As dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I felt a strange peace settle over me. The forest was still a place of wonder, its beauty undeniable, but now I understood its dangers, the hidden perils that lay just beyond the familiar. I knew, despite the fear, despite the uncertainty, that I'd return. The call of the wild, the promise of adventure and discovery, was too strong to resist. The forest was both beautiful and terrifying, a world of secrets and shadows, and something in me was drawn to it, even now, knowing what might be waiting in the dark. The mountains had always been my sanctuary, a place where I could lose myself in the vastness of nature and find peace in its solitude. But after that night, I can't look at them the same way. What I saw, what I experienced, has changed me, burrowing into my bones like a cold I can't shake. The worst part is the lack of proof, just a lingering fear and the haunting memory of those lights dancing in the dark. As a nature photographer, I'd spent countless nights alone in the wilderness, waiting for that perfect shot. The solitude never bothered me. I craved it, relishing the quiet, the absence of human noise, the chance to connect with the raw beauty of the world. That's why I chose Mount Silverback for my latest trip, drawn by its reputation for breathtaking sunrises. I was determined to capture one in all its glory, a crown jewel for my portfolio. What I got instead was a night I'll never forget. I arrived at the campsite in the late afternoon, the sun still high enough to give me plenty of time to set up and scout the perfect spot for my shoot. The air was crisp, laced with the scent of pine and wild herbs, the kind of clean that makes you feel alive. I pitched my tent on a flat ridge overlooking the valley, the peaks of Mount Silverback rising sharply against the sky. Unpacking my gear, camera, tripod, lenses, I felt the familiar thrill building. This was going to be a good one. I could feel it in my gut. The sunset that evening was a stunning prelude, the sky transforming into a canvas of fiery oranges, soft pinks, and deep purples. The valley below was already cloaked in shadows, the contrast with the glowing peaks stark and dramatic. I snapped a few test shots, more out of habit than necessity, adjusting my settings as the light shifted. As darkness fell, I retreated to my campsite, a small fire crackling just enough to heat a can of soup and cast a warm glow against the chill. The night was clear, stars emerging one by one, until the sky was a glittering tapestry. I leaned back in my camp chair, sipping the last of my soup, savoring the serenity of the moment. Then I heard it, a scream, faint but unmistakable, echoing off the mountain walls. I sat up, my heart skipping, straining to listen. The forest was quiet. The usual nighttime sounds, crickets, rustling leaves, the occasional hoot of an owl, present but subdued. Then it came again, a human scream, but wrong, distorted, like it was filtered through a broken radio. A chill ran through me, unrelated to the cool mountain air. I grabbed my flashlight, its beam cutting a weak path through the darkness. "Hello," I called, my voice sounding small against the vastness of the mountain. "Is anyone there? Do you need help?" No answer came, just the echo of my own words fading into the night. I stood, scanning the blackness, the beam trembling in my grip. The scream had seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, impossible to pinpoint. I debated investigating, but the terrain was treacherous even in daylight, steep drops, loose rocks, and dense underbrush. In the dark, it was a death wish. I was about to sit down, convincing myself I'd imagined it, when I saw the lights. At first, I thought they were stars, unusually bright and low on the horizon. But then they moved, smooth, controlled arcs that no star could mimic. They were in the valley below, weaving between the trees, sometimes vanishing behind a ridge only to reappear somewhere else entirely. My photographer's instinct kicked in. I grabbed my camera, heart pounding, and attached my longest lens. Through the viewfinder, the lights were clearer but no less strange, perfectly round, glowing a soft, pulsing white, like bioluminescent orbs floating in the dark. I started shooting, my finger working the shutter almost on autopilot, capturing their eerie dance. But something about them felt wrong, unnatural, like they didn't belong in this world. As I watched, the lights began to climb the mountain, moving toward me with a purpose that made my skin crawl. I lowered the camera, suddenly feeling exposed on the cliff's edge, the vast darkness of the valley yawning below. I retreated to my tent, zipping myself inside, the thin nylon feeling like no protection at all. Through the fabric, I could see the faint glow of my dying campfire, and beyond it, the strange lights growing brighter, closer. Sleep was impossible. I lay in my sleeping bag, every muscle tense, listening as the normal sounds of the forest fell silent. All I could hear was my own breathing, ragged and loud, and the pounding of my heart. Then came the footsteps, slow, deliberate, crunching on the gravel around my campsite. They circled the tent, once, twice, a third time, stopping right outside the entrance. My breath caught, my hand gripping the flashlight like a weapon. A shadow fell across the tent, backlit by a light far brighter than my fire's embers. I saw a hand reach for the zipper, long, unnatural fingers with too many joints, splayed against the fabric. A whimper escaped me, raw fear breaking through. The hand paused, as if it heard me, then vanished. The light faded, the footsteps retreated, and the night grew still again. I lay there shaking for what felt like hours, too terrified to move, to breathe too loudly. When dawn's first light began to seep through the tent, I found the courage to unzip the entrance, my hands trembling so badly I fumbled the zipper twice. The campsite looked untouched, my fire reduced to ashes, my gear undisturbed. No footprints, no signs of anything. Had I dreamed it? Some altitude-induced hallucination? With shaking hands, I grabbed my camera. The photos would prove it wasn't my imagination. I'd taken dozens of shots of those lights, of the sunset, of the valley. But as I scrolled through the images, my blood ran cold. Every photo from that night was gone, not just the lights, but the sunset shots, everything after I'd arrived at the campsite. The memory card was blank, as if the night had never happened. I packed up in a frenzy, my grand plans for a sunrise shoot abandoned. As I was about to leave, something caught my eye at the edge of the campsite, a small, smooth stone, perfectly round, glowing faintly in the morning light. I hesitated, then picked it up. It was warm, far warmer than it should have been after a cold mountain night, its surface unnaturally smooth like polished glass. I don't remember much of the hike down. I moved on autopilot, my mind reeling, trying to piece together what had happened. By the time I reached my car, I'd almost convinced myself it was a vivid nightmare. But the stone in my pocket, still warm against my skin, told a different story. I've been home for a week now, poring over my camera, trying to figure out what happened to those photos. I've scoured the internet for local legends, UFO sightings, anything that might explain what I saw. I've even thought about going back to prove it was all in my head. But every time I close my eyes, I see those lights, their hypnotic pulse, and hear that distorted scream echoing off the mountain. I feel the warmth of that stone, now sitting on my desk, still faintly glowing in the dark. I haven't gone on a photography trip since. The thought of being alone in the wilderness, of what might be watching from the shadows, is too much. But sometimes, late at night, I find myself staring out my window at the distant silhouette of Mount Silverback, its peaks dark against the sky. I wonder, are those lights still there, moving in their strange, mesmerizing dance? Is someone else out there, feeling the same terror and wonder I did? And deep down, in a part of myself I'm almost afraid to acknowledge, I feel a pull, a need to go back to uncover the truth behind those lights, those footsteps, that hand. Why me? Out of all the people who've camped on that mountain, why was I the one to see them? I have no answers, and I'm not sure I ever will. But one thing I know for certain, the next time I hear about strange lights in the sky or unexplained mysteries in the wilderness, I won't dismiss them. I know now, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that there are things out there we can't understand, and sometimes, if you're not careful, they find you. The forest was my haven, a sanctuary where I could lose myself in the embrace of nature and let the chaos of the world slip away. But as I stood there, staring at the empty space where my lantern should have hung, a chill slithered up my spine. It wasn't just the missing light that unnerved me. It was the unshakable sense that something or someone had been there, moving silently through the night while I slept. I come to the woods seeking solitude, a chance to recharge and find peace. Life had been a whirlwind, work deadlines piling up, family obligations pulling me in every direction, and a nagging feeling that I was losing myself in the noise. The thought of a few days alone in my favorite spot in the Cascadia National Forest felt like the perfect antidote. I packed light, just the essentials: tent, sleeping bag, a few books, and my trusty lantern, and drove out to a secluded campsite deep in the wilderness, determined to reclaim some calm. The drive was long but restorative, the highway giving way to twisting dirt roads that wound through dense stands of pine and oak. The air grew cooler, cleaner, carrying the sharp scent of resin and the faint sweetness of wildflowers. By the time I reached the trailhead, the sun was high, casting dappled shadows across the forest floor. I shouldered my pack and set off down a familiar path, the crunch of gravel under my boots blending with the chorus of birdsong and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Each step took me further from the clamor of everyday life, the weight of emails and obligations fading with every breath of crisp air. The trail meandered through towering trees, their branches forming a green cathedral above me, and I felt my soul settle, soothed by the forest's quiet embrace. I reached my campsite by early afternoon, a small clearing near a babbling brook, the ground cushioned with moss and fallen leaves. It was perfect, a secluded pocket of serenity far from the world's demands. I set up my tent, gathered firewood, and hung my lantern on a low branch just outside, its soft glow a promise of comfort in the coming night. The first day passed in a blissful haze. I hiked a nearby trail, my boots sinking into the soft earth, my eyes drinking in the vibrant greens and golds of early autumn. I read by the brook, the murmur of water blending with the words on the page, and let the hours slip by unnoticed. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, I built a fire and cooked a simple meal, sausage and potatoes sizzling in a cast-iron skillet, the smoky aroma mingling with the scent of pine. I sat by the fire until the stars emerged, their light twinkling through gaps in the canopy, a reminder of the vastness of the universe and my own small place in it. The night air grew chilly, driving me into my tent, where I fell asleep almost instantly, lulled by the brook's gentle song and the whisper of leaves in the wind. But when I woke the next morning, something felt wrong. The air was heavy, the forest too quiet. I crawled out of my tent, rubbing sleep from my eyes, and froze. My lantern was gone. It had been hanging on the branch just outside my tent, its sturdy clip secure, but now the branch was bare, the ground beneath it undisturbed. I searched the clearing, thinking maybe I'd moved it in a half-asleep haze, but found nothing. It was as if the lantern had vanished into thin air. A shiver ran through me, cold and sharp. I was alone out here, miles from the nearest town, or so I'd thought. I tried to shake off the unease, telling myself it was probably just an animal. A curious raccoon, maybe, or a squirrel with a knack for theft. But the thought felt hollow, a flimsy excuse against the growing whisper in my mind that something wasn't right. Determined not to let it ruin my trip, I spent the day exploring a new trail, the forest's beauty a welcome distraction. I followed a path that wound up a gentle ridge, where wildflowers swayed in the breeze and a hawk soared overhead, its cry piercing the quiet. But as the sun began to set, the unease returned, sharper now, like a blade pressing against my nerves. I kept glancing over my shoulder, the feeling of being watched impossible to ignore. Shadows seemed to shift just beyond my sight, and the rustle of leaves felt less like the wind and more like something moving, keeping pace. I returned to camp as dusk fell, the forest cloaked in deepening shadows, the air heavy with the scent of earth and pine. The sky was a bruised purple, the stars not yet bright enough to offer comfort. I cooked dinner over the fire, beans and cornbread this time, but the usual joy of a campfire meal was gone, replaced by a gnawing dread that settled in my chest. As night fell, the forest seemed to close in around me, the darkness thick and suffocating. I sat by the fire, the flickering flames casting dancing shadows on the trees, trying to relax. But every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves sent my heart racing. Without my lantern, the fire was my only light, its glow feeble against the vast blackness. Exhaustion eventually won out, and I crawled into my tent, though sleep was hard to come by. I lay awake for hours, listening to the forest sounds, each one amplified in the stillness. A distant owl, the creak of a branch, the soft gurgle of the brook. They should have been comforting, but they felt sinister, like the forest was holding its breath. It was well past midnight when I finally drifted off, my dreams uneasy, filled with shadowy figures and unseen eyes. I woke with a jolt, the first light of dawn just beginning to filter through the tent's fabric. For a moment, I lay still, disoriented, unsure what had roused me. Then I saw them long, deep scratches on the tent's side, the fabric frayed and torn. My heart stuttered. The marks hadn't been there yesterday, I was sure of it. They were too deliberate, too deep for a small animal, the kind of damage a raccoon or squirrel couldn't manage. Something larger, something with intent, had been here. Fear crashed over me, cold and heavy. I was alone miles from help, with no phone signal, nowhere to call out. The forest, once my refuge, now felt like a trap, its beauty masking something darker. I scrambled out of the tent, my breath coming in short gasps, and checked the perimeter of the camp, searching for tracks, broken branches, anything to explain the scratches. But the forest gave nothing away. No footprints, no signs of disturbance, just the endless expanse of trees and silence. As the day wore on, I tried to reclaim the rhythm of camp life. I hiked a short loop, fished in a brook, the cool water soothing my frayed nerves. I even managed to read a few pages, though my eyes kept darting to the tree line. The forest's beauty was still there, the sunlight glinting off the water, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, but it felt hollow, overshadowed by the lingering sense of something watching. As the sun dipped low, the dread returned, stronger, more insistent, like a drumbeat in my chest. That evening, I sat by the fire, the flames my only defense against the encroaching dark. The forest seemed to press closer, the trees looming like silent watchers. The usual night sounds, crickets, owls, were absent, replaced by an oppressive silence that felt alive, heavy with intent. I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me, tracking my every move, hidden just beyond the fire's light. Then, just as I began to think I'd imagined the lantern's disappearance and the scratches, I heard it, a soft rustling, the unmistakable sound of something moving just outside the circle of firelight. My heart leapt into my throat. I stood, gripping a stick from the fire, its end glowing faintly. "Who's there?" I called, my voice steady despite the fear clawing at me. No answer came, just the whisper of wind through the trees and the crackle of the fire. The rustling stopped, the forest falling silent once more, but the sense of a presence lingered, heavy and unyielding. I didn't sleep that night, too afraid to let my guard down. I sat by the fire, feeding it sticks to keep it burning, my eyes scanning the darkness. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound a threat, but nothing else came. Whatever it was gone, or so I told myself. As dawn broke, painting the sky in soft pinks, I packed up my camp in silence, my movements quick and deliberate. I wanted out, away from the forest and its secrets. The hike back to the trailhead was tense, my ears straining for any sound of pursuit, my eyes darting to every shadow. The events of the past few days weighed on me, each step heavy with a memory of the missing lantern, the scratches, the rustling in the dark. I never spoke of it again, determined to let the mystery fade, to bury it in the forest depths. But the memory clung to me, a reminder of what lurks in the shadows, waiting for the unwary. The forest had shown me its darker side, but I'd emerged unscathed, wiser and warier. As I drove away, the trees shrinking in my rearview mirror, I felt a mix of relief and unease. The forest was still beautiful, still wild, but now I knew its secrets were not all kind, and some were better left alone. I'd always dreamed of a beach wedding, the kind with soft sand underfoot and the ocean whispering vows alongside us. But I never imagined our honeymoon would twist into a living nightmare, a terrifying ordeal that would haunt us for years. Even now, safe in our home, I can still hear the gentle lapping of waves and the ominous hum of that boat's engine, a sound that chills me to my core. It was supposed to be perfect. After months of planning and a beautiful ceremony, my new husband, Mark, and I were ready for some alone time. We both agreed that a crowded resort honeymoon wasn't for us. We craved adventure, solitude, a chance to connect without the buzz of phones or the clamor of modern life. So when Mark suggested camping on a remote beach he'd heard about from a coworker, I was all in, picturing starry nights and quiet moments together. We arrived at the beach late in the afternoon, the sun already dipping toward the horizon, casting a golden glow across the sand. The spot was even more breathtaking than we'd imagined. Miles of untouched, powdery sand stretched in both directions, kissed by crystal-clear turquoise water on one side and bordered by lush tropical vegetation on the other. Best of all, there wasn't another soul in sight, just the two of us in our private paradise. It's perfect, I breathed, taking the view as Mark parked our rental car at the edge of the tree line, where palms and dense shrubs met the beach. He grinned, leaning over to kiss me, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "Only the best for my bride," he said, his voice warm with love. We set up our tent a safe distance from the water, mindful of the tide, hammering stakes into the soft sand as the sun sank lower. As it set, painting the sky in vibrant oranges and pinks, we sat on a blanket, sharing a bottle of champagne we'd brought for the occasion. The only sounds were the gentle waves and the distant calls of tropical birds settling into the trees. "I love you," Mark said, pulling me close, his arm warm around my shoulders. "Here's to a lifetime of adventures together." We clinked our plastic champagne flutes, giggling as the bubbles tickled our noses. In that moment, wrapped in the warmth of his embrace and the beauty of the beach, I felt like the luckiest woman alive. As night fell, we retreated to our tent, eager to consummate our marriage under a canopy of stars. The rhythmic crash of the waves provided a soothing backdrop as we made love, our bodies moving together in perfect harmony, the world outside fading to nothing. Afterward, we lay entwined, our breathing soft, our heartbeats sinking as we whispered about our future. Dreams of travel, a cozy house, maybe a dog or two. I must have dozed off, lulled by the ocean's lullaby, because the next thing I knew, Mark was shaking me awake, his voice low and urgent. "Babe, wake up. There's something out there." I blinked, disoriented, my mind foggy with sleep. "What? What time is it?" I mumbled, sitting up in the darkness. Just after midnight, he said, his voice tight with tension. "Listen." I strained my ears, at first hearing only the familiar sounds of the beach, the waves, the rustle of palm fronds in the breeze. But then I caught it, low mechanical hum, growing steadily louder. A boat engine, unmistakable, cutting through the night. "Maybe it's just some late-night fisherman," I suggested, trying to sound calm, but my stomach twisted. Even as I said it, felt wrong. Why would fishermen come so close to shore in the dead of night? Mark's face was pale in the dim light filtering through the tent. "I don't think so," he whispered. We unzipped the tent's flap just enough to peer out, crouching low to stay hidden. That's when we saw it, a large, dark shape gliding through the water, its running lights off, making it nearly invisible against the moonlit sea. As it drew closer, we could make out more details. It wasn't a typical fishing boat. but something sleeker with a low profile built for speed, not utility. My heart pounded. "We should hide," Mark whispered, his grip tightening on my arm, his voice barely audible. "Something's not right." We scrambled into our clothes, sweatshirts and shorts pulled on in a frantic rush, and slipped out of the tent, crouching low as we crept toward the tree line. We hid behind a thick palm, its rough trunk pressing against our backs, and watched as the boat pulled up to the shore. The engine cut off, plunging the beach into an eerie silence. Then came a splash, someone jumping into the shallow water, followed by hushed voices speaking in a language I couldn't understand. Sharp, clipped syllables that sounded urgent, secretive. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I could make out several figures disembarking, moving with purpose. They were carrying large, bulky packages, passing them from person to person in a human chain that stretched up the beach toward the trees. My breath caught. "Oh my God," I whispered, realization hitting me like a wave. "Mark, I think we're witnessing a drug drop." He nodded, his face grim, the moonlight highlighting the tension in his jaw. "We need to get out of here now," he said, his voice low but firm. We began inching back toward our car, moving as quietly as possible through the dense underbrush, every snapping twig and rustle of leaves sounding like a gunshot in my ears. Thorns snagged at our legs, drawing blood, but we didn't stop. I was sure one of the men would hear us, that any moment a flashlight would swing our way, pinning us in its beam. We reached the car, our legs scratched and stinging, our breath shallow with fear. Mark fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking so badly he could barely fit them into the ignition. Come on," I urged, my voice trembling as I glanced back toward the beach. The muffled voices of the men carried on the breeze, but they seemed focused on their task, unaware of us. Mark turned the key. Nothing. The engine didn't even sputter. He tried again, then again, each attempt met with silence. No, I moaned, panic rising like bile in my throat. This can't be happening. Mark took a deep breath, his hands gripping the steering wheel as he tried to steady himself. "It's okay," he said, though his voice shook. "The battery might just be drained." "I'll try again." But no matter how many times he turned the key, the car stayed stubbornly silent. We were trapped miles from help, with no phone signal and a group of strangers on the beach who clearly didn't want witnesses. "What do we do?" I whispered, fighting back tears, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. Mark ran a hand through his hair, his eyes darting as his mind raced. "We can't stay here," he said. "They might come this way when they're done. We need to move deeper into the forest, find a place to hide until morning." I nodded, swallowing my fear, though it felt like a physical weight in my chest. We grabbed what we could from the car, a flashlight, a couple of water bottles, the pocket knife Mark always carried, and slipped into the dense vegetation. The forest was a wall of darkness, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and rotting leaves. We moved as quietly as we could, but every step felt too loud, every rustle a betrayal. Was that an animal, or were we being followed? The adrenaline that had kept me going began to fade, leaving me exhausted and jittery, my nerves frayed to breaking. After what felt like hours, we stumbled into a small clearing where a fallen tree offered some cover. "We should rest here," Mark said, his voice hoarse with fatigue. "Try to get some sleep." "I'll keep watch." I wanted to protest, to insist I could stay awake too, but my body was screaming for rest. I curled up on the softest patch of ground I could find, using Mark's lap as a pillow, the rough fabric of his shorts against my cheek. Despite the fear gnawing at me, exhaustion pulled me under, my dreams a jumble of dark boats and faceless figures. I woke to the soft light of dawn filtering through the canopy, disoriented, the ground cold beneath me. For a moment, I wondered why I was sleeping in the dirt, then the terror of the night flooded back. "Mark." I sat up, my voice sharp with panic. "I'm here," he said, emerging from behind a tree, his face drawn and tired. "I was just scouting the area. I think we're safe for now." We decided to head back to the beach, praying the smugglers were long gone. The journey back felt endless, the forest dense and unyielding, every shadow a potential threat. My legs ached, my scratches stung, but we pressed on, driven by the need to escape. Finally, we broke through the tree line onto the sand. Our campsite looked untouched, almost absurdly normal after the night's horror. The tent still standing, our cooler still by the fire pit. The car sat where we'd left it, glinting innocently in the morning sun. "Should we try it again?" I asked, my voice hesitant, afraid to hope. Mark nodded, his jaw set with determination. We approached the car cautiously, half expecting someone to leap out, but the beach was empty. This time, when Mark turned a key, the engine roared to life, the sound startling in the quiet morning. We stared at each other, disbelief mingling with relief. "Maybe it just needed time to dry out in the salty air," Mark said weakly, but we both knew it didn't add up. We didn't waste time questioning it. We threw our gear into the car, not bothering to pack neatly, and peeled out, the tires kicking up sand as we sped away from the beach. We drove straight to the nearest police station, our story tumbling out in a frantic, disjointed rush. The officers listened, jotting down our statement, but I could see the skepticism in their eyes. A young couple on their honeymoon, spooked by shadows, imagining drug smugglers? They probably thought we'd seen some locals fishing and let our imaginations run wild. But I know what we saw, what we heard, the hum of that boat, the hushed voices, the bulky packages passed in the dark. Even now, months later, I have nightmares about that night. The fear of being discovered, the helplessness of being stranded. We haven't gone camping since. Our idea of a perfect vacation now involves crowded resorts, bright lights, and the hum of other people's presence. But sometimes when I close my eyes, I'm back on that beach, the sand cool beneath my feet, the waves lapping at the shore. And I wonder, what if we hadn't woken up? What if the car hadn't started? What if we never made it off that beach at all?